Chapter 16. Ploy of the Two Dragons. Hell broke loose after Kale's declaration. Many Dragonlords were furious, at least most of the ambitious ones. The other four big families didn't display any negative emotion towards those words, though. They all agreed with those words. The family rank meant more than just a number, it meant power. Kale, watching all those pompous lords shouting and arguing with one another, decided to prove his point. He stood up and walked to the center of the room, and that simple act made the other lower families fall silent, and the other sacred four to raise an eyebrow in curiosity. He looked at the specific lord that was trying to defend his rightful right to harass without any consequences and asked, "I know you are angry at those words. You probably feel that I am underestimating you. So you have the right to call for a duel, right here and right now, to repair your image. I can guarantee that I won't be calling for my sworn sword to fight in my stead." The man stared grimly at Kalares. He heard about the rumors of his magic powers, the flames that consumed the Targaryen's second son from inside. "You speak so rightfully about a duel, Lord of Dragonlord, when you use magic against our swords," he said, as if pinning Kale against everyone else here. This made Kale grin. And what's the problem with that? Why should just the sword be right to represent one's strength? What about the spear? What about the warhammer? Would you have a problem with those as well? "That's not what I meant, and you know it." He tried to defend his point of view but was interrupted by Kale this time. "Or perhaps you find it more honorable to die by being cut in half instead of burned. If that's the case, I can work with that since my magic is versatile. So tell me what you prefer, to be split in half by your waist, or from head to crotch." That made the man gulp, alongside many of the loud Dragonlords in the vicinity. The way Kale talked about his magic, like he could just do things without any hurdle or issue, as easy as breathing. It made them nervous. Magic without costs and drawbacks was the ultimate weapon besides dragons. There was an eerie silence after that statement. Many lords were actually staring at the poor man, waiting to see how he will reply. Should he accept the duel, that humiliation would be washed off. By his own blood, most likely. Should he decide to wisely back off? People would look down on him for being craven, even though they all agreed that it was the wisest decision. Human hypocrisy. A cough managed to cut the tension in the room, and made every lord look towards the source of the sound. All except Kalares, who kept staring at the poor nameless Dragonlord like he was prey, with a sinister smirk on his lips. "Lord of Dragonlord, please take your seat. I have an announcement to make," said the old man Belaris. Kale kept staring at the nameless lord even after that request for quite a few seconds. It made the poor man sweat, but he felt relieved that the predator eventually decided to go back to his seat without speaking any further. "As all of you can see, I am already quite old and can't keep ruling my family for long. So I decided to use this conclave to name my heir, Balon of Belaris, my firstborn, as the next ruler of the Belaris family once my time has come," he said with a sinister gleam in his eyes. Everyone had different reactions to that announcement. Weaker families didn't have any clue about anything and only thought of it as a regular procedure. The top 10 families, however, had very particular expressions. They knew something. The most curious reaction was the Seldaris and Malgarin family reactions. Kale couldn't precisely read it because he didn't have time to pay attention to them. He had his part to play in this and stared at the Lord of Belaris with a predatory grin on his lips, which attracted the attention of many Dragonlords. The rest of the conclave was about specific events that became relevant in the past 10 years, and some old rules that became redundant and outdated since they were proposed centuries ago. The conclave ended without any bloodshed, and everyone was already leaving. Kale, Vaila, and Valinor were already flying high in the skies on their dragons, close to one another so they could finally talk. "What in the name of the 14 was that, Kale?" asked Vaila curiously. "Since when are we in a cold war against the Belaris family?" Valinor nodded. "I am not really an expert in the Valyrian family affairs, but the late lord always went for a balanced and friendly existence with the Belaris. It could be said that the only reason why they are the first family is because the Regal Lion is the second." Vaila thought of something when she heard those words. Are they related to father's death in any way? She was already feeling anger towards the Belaris after considering the circumstances. Valinor instantly grew serious at that question. If that was the case, he would prepare all their men to storm the Belaris the moment they landed. But contrary to their solemn and angry expressions, Kale laughed out loud, like he heard the biggest joke in the world. "Who said I'm against them? I'm just completing my side of the deal." That made the duo gobsmacked. What the fuck? A flashback. Kale was brought into a beautiful and secluded room inside the Capitol building. Although it was indoors, one could see that this whole place was dedicated to a garden. Lilac, moonbloom, dragon's breath, evening star, frost fires, cold snaps, and many other flowers turned this place into the most peaceful and colorful location he have ever seen. Even the golden-domed roof above was transparent from the inside, which made the sunlight shine directly towards the center of the room, where a round artificial pond was built. Refin's picture here. Beside the pond, tossing some treats to the fish inside, was a hunched old man, wearing a dark cloak. It's been a while since I've met you. Calaries of Regal Lion. Kale stopped in his tracks and stared at the man. I must apologize, I don't know who you are, and I don't remember meeting you, he said. The old man chuckled. Of course you wouldn't. It was almost 30 years ago, and you were just a baby. I and my late wife were with your late father waiting for your delivery. Kale's eyes went wide. You grew up strong. You are fitting for your family. Calaries, he said with a soft voice like he was talking to his own son. I don't know who you are. Kale replied, still confused. I am Jackaries, Lord of Valyria, Fire and Blood, Lord of Regal Lion. Kale almost choked on that. Are you fucking kidding me? But the man continued talking like they were family after the formal introduction. Your late mother and one of my late wives used to be great friends, and they even looked very similar, almost as if they were sisters. Your mother was devastated when my Remora passed away. Obviously, your father and I used to be good friends. Although the man couldn't hold his liquor very well, the old man chuckled at that memory. For the next 10 minutes, both Kale and Jackaries talked about the old tales of the last Regal Lion lords. The Lord of Valyria seemed very melancholic when remembering his old friend. Do you know why I called you here, Lord of Regal Lion? He said with a more serious tone. Friendship of families aside, business is business. I have a hunch, Kale replied, which caused Jackaries' eyebrow to raise. Kale slowly walked around the pond, staring at everything with a serene expression. Talking about his late family made him know them better, and for that he was very grateful. Twin dragons, he said. The last time that happened to House Valyria, according to my family's history books, was around 600 years ago. And back then there were 60 Dragonlord families. The old man could only give him a wry smile. It seems that I'm the one who doomed our freehold again. To think that after so long. He could only sigh. To be honest, Kale and Jackaries were not talking about actual twin siblings. The Valyria family was strong because they grew in number as fast as they grew in power. To keep that power, they had to keep those numbers. Their tradition was to have an incest harem, which meant that every sibling from the same mother and father would belong to the eldest of that line. They would all be part of either the eldest harem or his protectors. The problem is that with many wives, each wife siring a little harem club for their firstborns, it was just a matter of time before two wives had one son each, at the exact time. And those two were the actual overall firstborns. The probability of that was extremely low, but it did happen every so often, and every time it did, some Dragonlord families would disappear from the freehold due to a civil war for the right of lordship. That would lead outsiders to believe that the freehold was ruled by two equally strong families that always fought one another for dominance, but in actuality, they both are from the same family. What do you want from me, Lord of Valyria? The old man stared at him. I know that your family has a secret, an elixir that can extend the life of the one who drinks it by some time. Kale turned around and stared into the old Valyrie's eyes. You can't be serious. It's our family treasure. We have no more than 2 of those, one for me and one for my sister. It would take over a decade to make another. The old man nodded. He knew how rare it was. The late Lord of Regal Lion was one of his best friends. I am willing to offer you anything as long as it doesn't cross certain lines. Kale kept staring into the old man's eyes and decided to be honest about it. You are already very old. The full effect of the elixir won't work on you. Can you tell me how long I will have, even if roughly? About 8 years, maybe more, maybe less, but no more than 10, that's for sure, answered Kale. Jackaries started to ponder and said out loud, 8 years might be enough for me to settle down the inheritance issues in my family. At least it will decrease the probability of a civil war. Kale could just shake his head. The other Dragonlords won't just accept it. They will instigate a civil war because it would cause them to raise in power. You know how it works better than I do? The old man could only sigh. You are right. But 8 years is enough to at least prepare so my house doesn't face extinction due to these leeches. I can help you with that too, said Kale. Jackaries stared at him, waiting for him to continue. I can display hostility and enmity against your family during the conclave. The others would believe that there's a friction between our families. That way your sons would have an external threat to their family and won't be splitting the family in 2 halves to fight each other as long as I am in the freehold. The internal conflict only exists when the external threat is gone. I only want you to control your people to not actually attack my people. Let it be a cold war instead of an open conflict. That would stabilize the situation, but only for a while. Some of them would also try to join your side, to raise in power after defeating my family, said the old man. Yes, but anyone that joins my side won't join your son's side, which will reduce the collateral damage of the civil war since I won't be actually joining any battle. Again, that would only work for some time. Eventually, the ones who follow you will pressure you to join when the terms are favorable for their goals. What will you do then? Raise your swords and your dragons against my family, he said, a bit worried. Kale just smiled. I will just leave. We can plan a fabricated event to happen which will drive my family away from the freehold. The old man choked. You will be abandoning your lands? Your volcanoes? That your ancestors and your father fought to protect. The old man got a bit stirred by Kale's words. Of course I will, for a while. Until your sons settle down their differences and one side wins. When that happens, I will come back and reclaim what is mine. Kale concluded, to not let the old man worry too much about it. And when do you plan on leaving? Jackarees calmed down a bit, but he was still a bit livid. In 5 years. In 5 years I had planned on exploring a bit to learn more about magic anyway. Now it's even more convenient to my plans. And about your lands? I will sell them at the next emergency conclave that I will call in 5 years before I leave, and I will sell them to the highest bidder. Especially the mines of my volcanoes, and you can take advantage of that. I don't want you joining the bidding since I will take those lands back, but most of the other lords will be doing anything to earn money to be able to purchase those lands. And you can work with that. Create your own faction that will try to minimize the effects on the future civil war. I believe that most that join my side will be switching to that faction when they see me leaving the freehold without a fight. No one wants to be on the losing side. You would be sacrificing a lot for the sake of my family. What do you want in exchange? The old man was quite suspicious. Kale was going too far for someone else's family. A bit too generous. Kale grinned. I have a few things in mind. First, for my help in preventing the civil war from budding for the next 5 years, I want your assistance in my current plans. I'm building an outpost in the north near the ice wall of Westeros to study the magic of that place. I will need cover. I don't want others knowing what I am doing or where I am going. And if we both work together, they will be in the dark. Even the other 3. Lord of Valyria nodded. I can work with that. It won't be easy, but only our 2 families reside in the capital. Only small, weak families still live here. The other big ones have their own cities and only afford to send a limited number of spies here. For the potion, I want that white meteorite that your family owns. That made the old man start coughing out loud so hard that his assistant had to come and help him. Why, you can't be serious. Kale shrugged. 1 family treasure for 1 family treasure. Nothing fairer. Valyria was conflicted. I can give it to you, but I can give you something that could reward you better than that. Oh, I am all ears. It's a map related to the Shadowlands, the hidden place where our ancestors found the meteor, and according to the records there were many more. But they couldn't enter the place and only a few spoils were brought back. Considering your magic, you might find better things than an old white rock. Kale was considering it for a minute. The dream he had during his first night in this world came to mind. Shadowlands? This might be actually good, but... He narrowed his eyes. You already used that rock to forge something, didn't you? The old man avoided his gaze and coughed. I needed a cane. I can always reforge it into a sword. Nothing was really lost. Kale could only let out an exasperated sigh. I will take the map, but if I can get nothing out of it, I'm taking that cane. The old man closed his eyes and took a deep breath. All right, at least give the map a chance first. Kale nodded. You need to bring that cane today. I want to see if you really have it. The old man stared at Kale. I left it back home. If I send my men to bring it and wait for it, I will be late for the conclave. Kale just shrugged. I doubt anyone would mind having to wait for the lord of the first family. Jackarees could only chuckle at that. As for my sacrifice of leaving my lands, I want you to set a decree for your family not to claim those lands as long as I live, even if I'm not the current owner. That's doable. My family hasn't used a decree in 3 generations, but considering what you're planning, I think it's more reliable than me vowing that my family won't do such a thing. I doubt my idiot sons would listen to my final words after my death. Kale was slightly surprised. I'm quite shocked that you know what I plan on doing. The old man laughed. Oh please, you are young. But I have lived for 80 years. I know what you plan because honestly, I would do the same. The whole Sacred 5 Families was a plan that paid out, but we all know that there are only 2 actually powerful families in the freehold. The other 3 are just convenience. And we are dragons. We take what is ours through fire and blood. The man took a pause. But why are you so insistent on leaving? You said you had plans to leave anyway. Don't tell me you believe those Targaryen dreams? Kale laughed out loud. If I did, I would have been out of here already. No way in the name of the 14 would I wait 5 damn years to leave. Are you kidding me? No. Lord Bellarese, my family is small. There's only me and my future wife. No, I don't want to risk the last hope of my bloodline in a civil war. I decided to leave in 5 years when I heard about your sons. Can I just ask you for a favor, Kalares? He asked in a warmer tone. Sure. Let me be there for your wedding, even if disguised. I was there when your parents got married. I want to be there for when you and little Vaila become husband and wife as well, he said with a sad tone in his voice. Kale just smiled back. Of course, it would be an honor. Chapter 17. Regalion's Elixir. After landing in the yard beside the massive Regal Lion Tower, Kale requested his servants to remove the saddles of Neltharion. When the servants asked why, his answer was simple. I want a third handle in the middle, between the two on the sides, he answered with a smile. He didn't go into any details, but the servants never doubted him. They removed the massive saddle and took it to the blacksmiths who would be crafting the said third handle. Also, replace those golden details with metallic silver. Use Valyrian steel if needed. We have more than enough. Kale proceeded to walk inside his tower and brought both Vaila and Valinor to his solar. He didn't use this place much, but here was his father's solar, and many secrets lay inside this very room. The sun was setting on the horizon. The reddened rays of light came through the clean glass windows, and the trio was silent. Kale had a solemn expression on his face. Once they entered the solar, the place was clean and extremely detailed, with white pillars that resembled Roman structures, and padded comfortable sofa chairs with a mixture of black and green, black and red, and black and silver. The walls seemed to be made of shelves, filled with exquisite bottles which contained weird, colorful substances inside. Valinor could have sworn that he saw a pair of eyes in one of those. His desk was made of carved stone, with a small globe of planetos that didn't have much detail other than the names of specific locations, nothing compared to the huge one on the first floor of the library. There were also a couple of leather-covered books that Kale brought previously and was studying, and some parchments that he seemed to be writing weird rune-like symbols on. Behind the desk, there was the only bookshelf in the entire room, which seemed incredibly out of place considering that this was the solar of the second strongest lord in the freehold. But once Kale pulled one specific book, the shelf slid to the sides, displaying a small secret room behind his chair. Reference image here. The room was small and dark. There was no source of light inside other than the glow that seemed to come from a cupboard. The place was comparable to the size of a small deposit room. On one side, there were shelves embedded on the fused stone wall, with sculpted busts of different people, the previous lords of Regal Lion. In the center, there was a weird runic table with many different bowls spread on top of it. No one could perfectly see it because it was dark inside and Kale was occupying their field of view. The glowing cupboard, however, stood out like a sore thumb. Once Kale opened the fine glass door, he took 2 bottles that glowed blood red. Both that were watching from outside could see that there were at least 8 to 10 more of such bottles. Valinor was clueless, but Vaila was not. She was shocked by what he brought out of that secret room. After closing the secret shelf, Kale sat down on his comfortable chair and gestured for Valinor and Vaila to sit. Vaila sat a bit further back. She already had a clue of what Kale was about to do, and it was nothing related to her. So she just enjoyed the comfort of those fancy leather sofa chairs that had the perfect view of the window and the lava river outside. Kale placed both bottles on the desk and slid one towards Valinor, who sat right across him. "What is this, my lord?" Valinor was extremely confused. Even Vaila was looking seriously at Kale like he was committing a crime, and she was never to do such a thing. "That is one of the secrets of my family, Valinor. This one is known as Elixir. Its actual name I do not know. It probably has none. But what is important is what it does," Kale answered while leaning back. "And that is to extend one's lifespan." Valinor almost fell from his chair when he heard of it. Such an effect is legendary. Increase one's lifespan? By how much? How? My lord. He tried to speak. "Before you say anything, I want to lay down the facts, Valinor," Kale said with a serious face. "You are in your 40s. Right now you are considered still in your prime. Your northern blood makes you seem to age slower than others, but you age regardless in 5 to 10 years. You won't be able to fight the way you do right now." Valinor could only nod in acceptance. "Therefore, you taking one of these elixirs is essential. How can you protect our family during the toughest years if your bones can't move like they used to? How will you train me to use the sword?" "Time is a resource, Valinor. It's a resource that slowly fades away, and we have no way to get it back. Normally, this elixir will give you extra time. You won't age for the next 5 and 10 years, 20 if you are lucky." Valinor stared deep into Kale's amethyst eyes. And what's the price? Kale smirked. Well, you won't get to have kids, he said, causing Valinor to almost have a heart attack. Then he continued, for the duration of the effect, of course. PFF, Vaila, who was dead serious a few seconds ago, couldn't hold back her own laugh. She tried. Oh, she truly did. But when she saw Valinor putting his hand over his chest with a pale face and wide eyes, she couldn't take it. My lord, you know what you are, don't you? Valinor said those words slowly while recovering himself. Of course I do. A very handsome and generous lord that is giving his best friend 2 extra decades of life. Unless you disagree with it, Kale replied with an innocent face. The corners of Valinor's mouth twitched. He took a deep breath and then stared at the glowing red flask in front of him. Why the second one? He asked. To exchange with the old man. It was part of our deal. Kale answered, don't think of drinking twice. It isn't effective, and it will kill your little worm for good. Valinor choked. To think that there would be such a dreadful side effect of taking it twice. Why don't you and Lady Vaila take them? Because we can't. It was Vaila who answered, our lifespan is already enhanced. The elixir is an extremely weak version of our enhancement. It was made to be given to our most trusted aides in times of need. Kale, you do know we only have around 10 of these, right? And you know it would take years, almost a decade, to brew one more considering the process needed. So, Kale replied, Valinor is my best friend. He is my sworn sword and protector of our bloodline. Not only that, we both trust him with our lives. I don't see the problem. I'm not talking about Valinor's bottle. I'm talking about the second one. Why would you give such priceless treasure? She asked. She trusted her brother, but she wanted to know his line of thought, his reasons. How can she help him if she doesn't know why he does the things he does? Kale smiled at her. Because we are exchanging one family treasure for another. Vaila's eyes went wide. Are you talking about that rock? Kale nodded. Although he gave a counteroffer, the rock is collateral. If whatever he gives me has no value whatsoever, that mineral is ours. And I know exactly what I want to craft with it, he concluded with a cunning smirk on his lips. Valinor's ears perked up. Oh, a weapon, I assume. But you already have Dragonheart, my revenant, and at least 10 other unnamed Valyrian steel weapons in your family's vault under the tower. Kale just gave them a cryptic smile. It won't be fun if I reveal it right away, right? It's just a weapon. Nothing related to our plans. He shrugged and looked at Vaila. What about your armor? Did you finish the schematics, V? She was frowning, really curious about the weapon. She knew it. If it was a regular common weapon, he wouldn't have the need to be this mysterious about it. Damn this man. Her eyes narrowed at Kale. Yes, I finished. I would show you, but it wouldn't be fun if I do it right away, right? Valinor smirked once he saw Kale hold back his frown. Damn you, woman, he thought, and then forced his best bright smile. Fair enough, Daff. He was interrupted by a knock on the door. My lord, said a deep male voice from the other side. A man claiming to be an old friend came to talk about a deal with you. He is alone. Should I kick him out? Kale stood up, grabbed the flask, and walked out of his solar, followed by Valinor. Vaila decided to go to the library. She has been studying the secrets of alchemy lately and was fascinated by it. As soon as Kalares displayed his dragonfire instead of magical flames, she knew that he was above her in destruction, so she decided to have her own specialty to not hold her future husband back. Fire and blood. Lord of Regal Lion, said a familiar voice under a hood. It was not an old voice, but Kale knew exactly who it was. It was Old Valyria's steward. Fire and blood. I hope our old friend is well, said Kale in return, offering him a polite welcome. Ah yes, he is doing just fine. I'm here on his behalf to hand you this, said the man while removing a big leather scroll from his cloak and presenting it to Kale. The scroll. It felt heavy. Leather? Dragonhide. It would preserve its contents for a lifetime. Even magical fire wouldn't destroy it. It's possibly resistant against dragonfire as well, answered the man. Kale nodded and opened the scroll. What he saw on the scroll made his eyes go wide. Did the old man craft this? The cloaked figure shook his head. No. It was found like this. It was one of the treasures of ages past that our ancestors uncovered. A drop of sweat slid down Kale's forehead. He quickly closed the scroll and placed it inside his own robes. I appreciate this. If what I believe about this scroll is true, you can tell the old man to keep his walking stick. It seems I won't be needing it after all. The man chuckled. He thought you would say that and said that he would still wait for your return. Many lords of our family tried to find that treasure. None succeeded. For 5 millennia? Kale just nodded while deep in thought. But thanks to a slight bump from Valinor, who stood behind him, he quickly collected himself and took a glowing blood-red potion from his robes and gave it to the cloaked man. "There you go," he said. The man nodded, but his eyes were glued to the bottle, staring at it like it was a precious treasure. "I can't thank you enough, Lord of Dragonlord. I know my lord requested too much, to part of one of the only 2 bottles of such elixir that were reserved for you and your sister, but be assured that even if your quest bears no fruit, my lord will compensate you appropriately," said the man with a serious face, staring at Kale's eyes. Kale in return just smiled. "It's fine. We are young. It might take a long time, but if our ancestors managed to create that," he pointed to the bottle, "so can we. The old man, on the other hand, has no time to lose." The man nodded, bowed deeply, and said his final words before leaving. "We will never forget such a favor, Lord of Dragonlord. Before you leave, tell the old man that I will be leaving by tonight on my dragon, and I would like him to help cover the situation. You know very well about our deal." The man nodded and left. Once the man left, Valinor spoke. "The lady said you had at least 10 more of those bottles, and it wouldn't affect you or her," he said with a smirk on his face, holding back his laugh. Kale shrugged. "Well, they don't need to know that." Chapter 18. Going North. After a good, well-deserved nap, Kale woke up to see the dark sky outside, enhanced by the flames of the rivers of lava all around his lands. "I still can't believe that I am here, it feels." He could only sigh. "This place is gorgeous. I am still feeling bad about the whole doom thing." After standing up, he went to bathe himself. He washed his long platinum-colored hair. The journey would take a while, and he doubted that he would have the comfort of these facilities anywhere outside of Valyria, at least for now. He wore his black Valyrian silk pants and comfortable black leather boots that covered 3/4 of his calf. After that, he opened a trunk that had a thick black coat with silvery patterns extended through every inch of it, and a dragonhide gambison that reached his knees, with long sleeves that reached his wrists. After tying his coat on his waist with a sword belt that was attached to a long scaled scabbard on his right side, he walked out of his room. As he reached his solar, he saw his sister waiting while reading a thick leather tome, and Valinor checking his provisions to see if he was carrying everything he might need. "This guy is like a mother." Kale couldn't help but chuckle. "You took your time, Kale. That was some long nap there." Vaila gave her brother a sweet smile and a hug after closing her book and setting it aside for now. "I will miss you," she said softly after giving him a soft kiss on the lips. Valinor decided to fetch his lord's armor and give the couple their own time, but he didn't make any effort to hide the teasing smile on his face, which made Vaila blush a little bit and made Kale retort, "What? Jealous that I have a girl?" No way in hell Kale would let Valinor off with those teases. The man was unscrupulous. You give him an inch, he takes a mile. People like that must be put in their place. Valinor just avoided his gaze and coughed. "I will bring your armor, my lord. Take your time," he said while walking out of Kale's solar. "Why do you pick on him so much?" asked Vaila once Valinor left. "I don't know. I just feel that I can be myself around him. He is a good friend, a true friend. I don't have to be cunning. I don't have to plot or backstab. I can tease him and take his teasing," replied Kale with a smile. Vaila giggled. "What about me? Do you need to be cunning and scheming with me?" she asked teasingly. "Why, of course. How else would I steal your heart without my crafty trickery?" he replied while kissing her soft, plump lips. "I want to say that once everything is settled, we should get married. But honestly, I am scared," he said with a wry expression. "Why?" she asked cutely, actually confused. "Every time someone says stuff like, 'When I get back, we will do something,' or 'When we meet again, we will talk about something,' it ends badly. It's almost like a curse." He could only chuckle. "Damn red flags. And to make it worse, this is Planitos. The flags here are not just red, they smell like blood." Vaila laughed out loud. "Don't worry about it. We will settle things when we get there. My armor will be done by next moon. I followed your advice and requested a helmet that followed your specifications." Kale nodded and gave her a hug that lasted almost a full minute. After letting go of her soft embrace, he walked towards an ornate chest on the corner of his solar, opened it, and took out a beautiful sword that was an exact replica of Dragonheart. But the blade wasn't red. It was the regular Valyrian steel blade. Even the sapphire dragon egg on the pommel was similar. He then grabbed a scabbard that was also inside the chest and sheathed the blade before turning around and handing it to her. "I requested some of our blacksmiths to alter and reforge one of our old swords into this one. It's a replica of the Dragonlord ancestral sword." Vaila grabbed it and unsheathed a few inches of the blade. The steel was so shiny that she could see her perfect reflection almost as if it was a mirror. The Valyrian steel patterns didn't bother it at all. It's beautiful, Kale, she said while staring at him with tearful eyes. Thank you, she whispered as she sheathed the blade and hugged the sword. Does it have a name? Kale stared at the frail yet determined girl in front of him and touched her cheek. Yes, I named it myself. It's called Queen's Hand. Queen's Hand, she mumbled softly. My Lord Valinor's voice came from the door, completely ruining the mood. Fucking cunt. Behind Valinor came 4 more assistants that carried all the pieces of his armor. All of them helped their liege to equip the armor. The shoulders were the toughest part because it was attached to a somewhat heavy dragonhide cloak with a velvet red layer on the inside. The shoulders also had silvery dragon scales on the back. It was unique armor by all means. Picture here, my lord, as you requested, said one of the servants while handing him a small dagger-like weapon. It was a sheathed small rondel dagger made of Valyrian steel, which Kale attached to his belt, on his back, hidden by the cape. Valinor came afterward, kneeling in front of Kale and presenting him with Dragonheart, the red blade of Regal Lion. This is the most beautiful yet dangerous-looking blade that I've seen, said Kale while grabbing the handle and sheathing it inside the scaled scabbard attached to his belt. Because it is my lord, said Valinor, it's red for a reason. Kale nodded but then mumbled words that no one but Vaila, who was by his side, heard. For now. Kale then gave Vaila and Valinor 1 scroll each, saying right after, these are the instructions for when I am gone. Vaila, I will be taking a glass candle that is exclusively linked to another candle inside the hidden room. Make sure to keep it by your side at all times in case of an emergency. Once your armor arrives and you and Valinor settle things in the Freehold, you will be flying to the north as well. Valinor, you will be in charge of our lands in the Freehold while we are gone. My lord, exclaimed Valinor, I should be the one going north. The lady. Don't underestimate me, Valinor, replied Vaila with a solemn look on her pretty face. I am no frail woman. I am a fire sorcerer and a dragon rider. She is right, Valinor, said Kale. You are a strong swordsman, but she has the power of magic on her side. You can send 2 of our family's dragon riders to escort her. I don't know how the situation outside the Freehold is. Valinor nodded reluctantly. Kale ordered his men to bring the huge leather bag with them as they walked down the stairs toward the yard. There were no stars in the sky. It was a dark, cloudy night, ominous. Kale muttered, but proceeded to the open area and shouted, Neltharion, Ruar! A loud roar echoed through the area as a massive crimson beast landed in front of Kale. No dragon speakers were needed anymore. Ever since Kale tamed and properly bonded with the dragon, it was like they could communicate telepathically. Well, not quite, but close. After ordering his personnel to attach the bag to the back of the enhanced saddle, Kale walked to his sister, grabbed one of her hands gently, and gave the back of her hand a gentle kiss. Sadly, he couldn't feel the softness of her skin anymore now that he was wearing gloves. We shall meet soon, my lady, he said softly. To which she replied, I shall await for it, my lord, offering a gentle, loving smile. Kale climbed the dragon and sat down comfortably on the saddle. He held the middle handle with his left hand and turned to his people, shouting, Owen Valinor, he said out loud, don't burn down the house while I am gone. The dragon gave a final roar before flapping his massive wings, soaring high in the skies and leaving the Freehold behind. As the dragon disappeared in the night sky, Valinor turned to Vaila and said exasperatedly, Why can't he be nice? Vaila chuckled. Did you want a kiss on the back of your hand as well, Valinor? The poor sworn sword almost choked, before turning around muttering, Even you, my lady, but then laughed. The late lord would be so proud of them. To think the meek and studious Kalares turned into such a fine, scheming and strong-willed man after losing his memories. He then looked at the moon, that could barely be seen. A blessing in disguise. In the skies, taking advantage of the cover of the night, a massive beast was crossing Essos, following the shore while moving north. Without a compass, and without stars to guide their direction, the wisest decision would be to use the land. I need to figure out how to make compasses. We do have lodestones that are used in the mines to separate iron, nickel, and cobalt from other materials. I might be able to craft a rudimentary one eventually, but I don't quite remember how to do it. Who would have guessed that those high school lessons would become so useful? All right, buddy, we have a long trip ahead of us. It might take 8 to 12 hours if we encounter no storms. Can you handle it at full speed? Neltharion grunted and small wisps of green smoke came out of his snout. Good. Kale held both side handles and leaned forward to stay as close to the dragon's body as possible. Najat. The dragon instantly exploded forward at extreme speed, turning the landscape below into a blurry mess. It was already past dawn. The sky was cloudy and the land of Skagos was covered by an ever-present frosty fog. a small wooden fort was built by the beach, with many tents inside. At this moment, the soldiers wearing black armor with red and silver tabards were defending themselves from an army. It's been 3 days since the siege started. The houses that currently rule Skagos took notice of them after Housekrawl just disappeared. The Magnar of King's House and Stain of Driftwood joined hands to strike the wooden fort that they recently discovered through their scouts. Push forward. We have 5 times their numbers, shouted a massive man with a scarred face, long ginger hair, and a thick beard. His eyes were blue, and he held a steel battle axe with both hands. My lord, we already lost 1,000 men since this siege started, said one of his men in return. This one was also tall, strong, and hairy. He wore pelts, furs, and low-quality iron swords with dragonglass daggers. The battle axe man snorted and spat on the floor. Valyrian bastards. I knew it was a matter of time for them to expand to our lands. But it matters not. They are probably running low on food and water. It won't take long until they either decide to fight us head-on or escape. The group of 5,000 men was currently trying to break through the wooden palisade that was raised by the soldiers, but they were having no luck. Every time they tried to come close, they would be pierced by spears. Having no actual armor was their greatest weakness. The ground below was covered in a mixture of white snow and red blood. Those Valyrian bastards don't even seem to sleep, be it morning, afternoon, or night. They are always on high alert. The ginger man narrowed his eyes. They are not just some weak noble soldiers. It was then that the sky seemed to turn dark, as if a massive shadow was cast over the battlefield. Chapter 19. Skagosi Welcoming Party. The moment that the Skags noticed the source of the giant shadow that was cast over the snowy battlefield, there was only one thing that they could say. Fuck, said Lord Magnar of King's House. Bring the wolves, prepare TOWRG, he shouted. Are you crazy? Screamed Lord Stain. We can't fight that thing even with all of our wargs joining hands. Lord Magnar grabbed Stain by his collar and stared deep into his eyes. We are Skagosi. We are not cravens. If this is to be our end, we shall take at least one of its wings with us. A massive pack of wolves came from the forest and started rushing towards the Valyrian soldiers holding the line. But before they could reach the wooden fort, all of them were swallowed by a massive wave of green fire that came down from the sky. Lower your weapons and surrender. A shout in common Westerosi tongue came from the back of the flying beast as it landed in front of the wooden fort as if protecting it. The bastard talks our tongue, exclaimed Magnar. Why would we surrender to some bloody dragon-fucking cunt from the other side of the world? He shouted. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't intimidated. Just the sheer size of that beast was terrifying. But he was a warrior. He would rather die in battle than of old age. Skagos was a place for the strong. Because this dragon-fucking cunt could use some extra slaves to do the hard work, replied the young man on the back of the dragon, displaying a sinister grin. Kale was obviously acting. Although he knew he had to kill eventually, he didn't really have to act on it until this day. The nausea wasn't that strong since he wasn't the one swinging the sword. Neltharion was his weapon, and considering his size, Kale could barely see what Neltharion did to those who approached his jaw. It affects you differently when you do it with your own hands. Fucking slaver, shouted Magnar angrily. We might die this day, but we will be taking one of IT's wings, and one of that bastard's arms as well. He shouted a final command to his men who cheered in return. Fucking idiots. One dragon is worth over 10,000 men on the battlefield. At least, you have what, 4, perhaps 5,000? And that's not even counting a dragon with a rider. The first wave of savages came running towards the dragon with their weapons in their hands, shouting and cheering like they welcomed death. Kale closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He could hear the shouts, and their footsteps, and his own heart started beating faster. So be it. He opened his eyes and said a single word. Dracarys, it wasn't a battle. It wasn't even a light struggle. The Skagosi host was demolished, annihilated, after a single word. Right now, it was about noon and the Regalian soldiers were escorting the healthy survivors towards the slave pits. The injured were examined by the healers that came on the boats, and if they were judged to be easy to heal, they would be escorted as well. If not, then they would be put down. They didn't have resources or even the desire to treat enemy soldiers and slaves. Lord Regalian, shouted a man. He was handsome with his light purple eyes and sandy short wavy blonde hair. He was tall, around 6 feet 2 inches, and wore a long chain-mail coat with plated sections on the chest, ribs, and hips. It was very similar to Stannis Baratheon's armor from the show, but the pointy pauldrons displayed the classic Valyrian style. On top of it, he also had a furry cloak to protect him from the cold. Once he approached, he kneeled down. My lord, Skagos is yours. How's the situation? How many men did we lose? Asked Kale, trying to maintain his calm facade. The smell of blood, guts, and burned flesh was all over the place, and honestly, it was nauseating. He wasn't prepared for this. No one is for their first time. We lost 120 men. The other 210 are injured, but we did as you commanded and protected the camp. Can the healers use blood magic to help our men heal faster? Asked Kale. My lord, but it requires a lot of sacrifices, answered the man. Kale nodded. Start with the heavily injured Skagosi, and move towards the healthiest ones as needed. They would be put down anyway. At least like this their lives can be helpful. He said it, but deep down he was feeling sick about it. The man nodded. As you command, my lord. What is your name? The man answered with his head still down, displaying his respect. I am Commander Arin Tharn, my lord. Good, Commander Arin. Their numbers were too exaggerated to be considered their defense army. I believe they brought all men that they could gather to this siege. Their lands are defenseless, and more important, there will be no danger in scouting the land. Send small teams of 10 to explore. Skagos is ours, so we must know it better than anyone else from now on. I also think like that, my lord. They had some skilled men among their numbers, but many young, old and clueless people that clearly didn't know how to handle weapons as well. It seems they believed that numbers alone will always win battles. Arin replied. There's no guarantee in wars. No plan survives the first contact, said Kale to both Arin and to himself. Now lead me to my tent. I believe you already have it set up. Aye. Follow me, my lord. The tent was huge. Its shape was similar to old Mongolian yurts. The color from the outside was mostly gray and red. A regular-sized doorway could be seen. It was more like an opening with a black curtain covering from inside. The floor was covered by many pelts. Many tapestries depicting dragons could be seen all over the walls. 2 small braziers on the corners of the room would bring warmth to anyone inside. It honestly resembled Theoden's royal tent from the Return of the King quite a lot. After removing his armor, only the plated parts, he decided to roam around the camp to understand how the place was built. He was surprised to see that even their camps followed the classic Valyrian circular settlement style. If one could see the capital of Valyria from up above, one would see that 90% of the city was built to resemble a circle, with the capital in the middle. The camp was similar, but in the middle was his tent surrounded by all the others. Beyond that was a wooden wall. Many slaves could be seen carrying wood, stones, and animal carcasses all over the camp. After spending the whole day getting acquainted with their defenses, Kale went towards another circular wall connected to the main camp. This one much smaller, but it was closer to the shore. The place where Neltharion would rest and, thanks to the slaves, be fed like a spoiled royal brat. It's not like I can complain about it, he chuckled as he walked back to his own tent. The sun was setting and he was hungry. He was without food for almost a full day. Not only him but the soldiers too. He could have eaten earlier, but his stomach wouldn't let him. Not after all he experienced today. After a full day it finally settled down. Once he sat down on his wooden chair, he saw a lavish dinner on his table and just ate like a proper barbarian king. He had to admit, food never tasted this good before. There was something about feasting after winning a battle that made even the simplest of meals praiseworthy. The night was cold. The icy wind would brush one's face almost as if it was piercing their skin with thin needles. It was extremely uncomfortable for a Valyrian who wanted warmth and fire always nearby. But for Kale, this was like he was back home. Not Valyrian home, but home. Back in his previous world he loved snow. It calmed him down and helped him to get over the brutal sights of the day. He slept like a proper dragon, but covered in at least 5 layers of sheets, furs, and pelts, only to awake around noon of the next day, and just because someone woke him up. Otherwise he would be in a long slumber. Cold was perfect for a long nap. My lord, our scouts will be arriving at any moment. We followed your commands and performed blood rituals to heal our injured. We are down almost 1,000 slaves now. We had a total of 2,247, and of those, at least 500 couldn't survive long enough for the ritual to take place. So we had to do as you said Commander Arin as he kneeled in front of Kale. Kale nodded as he leaned up from the bed. I understand, Commander, he said while still waking up, groggily. How can you deal with this insane cold? He asked. Arin chuckled. We have a lot of bonfires all over the camp and inside every tent. We brought fire mages to tend the fires so they're always burning. No wonder the Valyrians never decided to invade this far north. Kale laughed. If it wasn't for Captain Valen's report of frozen fire in this forsaken island, I would have commanded you all to move somewhere else. Summer Isles, perhaps. Arin stared at Kale and laughed lightly. Good. Now I know who I have to punish for making us stay in this damn place. His liege was way more easygoing and friendly than he expected. He never really interacted much with the actual Dragonlords of the family he served. Most didn't. He only knew Valinor, and even that one was a rare sight due to the difference in status. To think I could be enjoying the joys of the Summer Isles women if it wasn't for that cunt. Cale burst out laughing. After lunch, Cale kept asking Arin questions about the events that happened since they arrived. He was shocked to know that the Skags had wolf partners that seemed as tame as good doggos. But then he remembered that when he arrived, he saw a huge pack of wolves rushing towards the front lines before an Eltharion blasted them with dragon fire. Are they wargs? That many wargs? How is it possible? Wait, in the books Rickon Stark was to be sent to Skagos because he was losing to his direwolf's savage personality, becoming more beast and less man. He narrowed his eyes. There's something about this island. We need to find it. Whatever it is. Lord Regalion, Commander Arin, the scouts returned with more information about the island, said a soldier after doing the proper kneeling. After learning the details of what the scouts found inland, Cale was shocked. No, shocked wasn't the word. He was gobsmacked, and mayhaps a little scared. To think we lost 5 good men just like that, said Arin. It's truly infuriating. I should have known better. This place was always mysterious. Cale sighed. We can only prepare the best we can. Cale and Arin were at the gates watching the surviving scouts bring what looked like shackled children with nut-brown skin, dappled like deer with paler spots. Paying close attention to their hands, they could see that those little ones had only 3 fingers and a thumb on each hand, and sharp black claws instead of nails. They had a very angry expression that made their large gold and green eyes glow a bit, and their cat-like pupils were so retracted that they almost disappeared. What are these little bastards doing here? How the fuck is there a tribe on this fucking island? Yes, Cale was definitely scared. Chapter 20, Hidden Grove. For a whole week, Caleres tried to connect with the children of the forest that his men brought with chains from inland. He got many reports saying that they were quite calm in the presence of some of his men, but showed aggression towards others. After spending days looking into it, he gave up on trying to figure it out, at least for now. But one thing he knew is that these children of the forest didn't welcome his Valyrian bloodline, his more than any other to be specific. It seems that my dragon blood is hated by these creatures. The scouting parties also resumed their activity, but this time he decided to send groups of 30 instead of groups of 10. It decreased their speed since he only had so many soldiers available at the moment, but at least their survivability increased by a lot. Cale was happy to know that he hadn't lost a single man during the whole week of scouting, even after they brought 3 more children of the forest in chains. Right now, Cale was sitting inside his tent while reading reports that came with the latest 3 ships that arrived from Valyria. These were not reports from the Freehold. No one on this island was more up-to-date than he was when it came to the Freehold. But it was information about the Valyrian daughters that the ships docked at, on their way north, and more importantly, Dragonstone. Enar Targaryen. You are more dangerous than I thought, he thought as he put down the report of what his spies discovered. To think that you would start to strike deals with Westerosi kings this fast, becoming a middleman to sell Valyrian steel swords to Westerosi lords. How did you acquire them? Probably raiding some minor noble Valyrian ships and getting rid of the witnesses with your dragons. No Dragonlord would be stirred by the disappearance of regular Valyrian nobles. Cale kept tapping his finger on his desk, a habit that he had since his previous life for when he was in deep thought, and now you are amassing wealth. But for what end? I know that the Targaryens did nothing for a whole century after the Doom. His eyes narrowed, and now I have confirmed that they are the ones to spread at least some Valyrian steel swords across Westeros. He closed his eyes and muttered, Brightroar. Enough gold to buy an entire army. He said words that he remembered from the original novel by George R. Martin. What did you do with that fortune, Enar? What was the end of that accursed gold? Enar. He was interrupted by Arin Tharn, who approached the tent and called for him from outside, respectfully. My lord. The latest scouting party returned with interesting news. Come in, Commander Arin, he said while getting up and storing the pieces of parchment with the recorded information away. The man entered his tent and knelt in front of him before removing his helmet, displaying his sandy blonde hair. My lord, our men discovered a hidden grove. It's hidden inside what looks to be a deep cave. The reports say that a big tree with pale bark and a face carved on its surface was spotted in that place. And we also found 2 more of those so-called children of the forest in that hidden grove. Cale raised one eyebrow. Did any of our men succeed in communicating with the children of the forest in our custody? Arin shook his head. No, my lord. It seems that these creatures don't have the gift of speech. Nodding his head, Kale stood up and started putting on his armor. By the way, he continued while attaching the metal plates to his torso, did you notice if there are any males among the children of the forest we captured? Commander Arin looked confused, my lord, with all due respect, but we can't possibly tell. They don't talk and they look different. We have no idea how to differentiate male from female, unless you want to use more extreme methods, he concluded with an uncertain tone, which Kale instantly picked up. Letting out a sigh, Kale shook his head, no need for that. Try to find out information from the local savages if there's anyone knowledgeable enough about them. If it's a slave, offer them freedom in exchange for their services. If it's a local peasant, offer the freedom of an enslaved relative. If they don't have any or don't care, just offer them gold. He had decided to not enslave every living human on this island, only those who raised arms against him. On top of that, he didn't have enough men to keep a vast amount of slaves in check. Being here is not like being in the free cities. These men are savages that will jump at your jugular if you lower your guard for a second. Arin nodded. We have a few men that know how to speak the local language. By the way, my lord, why are you wearing your armor? Kale gave him a grin while sheathing Dragonlord in the scabbard attached to his belt. Because we are going out, Commander Arin. Bring 200 men. We are going to this so-called hidden grove to take a look. Also, bring some of the Magi that came with the recent ships and tell them to bring dragon blood for rituals. It might be useful. Their entourage left the camp on horses while the higher ranks among the soldiers were riding the famous Skagosi unicorns. They looked like large goat-like animals, with single long pale horns on their foreheads. They were way better than regular horses to tread in Skagos. They could move through snow and mountainous terrain with ease. Not only that, they were quite warm and comfortable to ride. To think I would ride a dragon and a unicorn in my lifetime, said Kale out loud while chuckling, enjoying the ride on top of his newest friend. A light gray unicorn with bright blue eyes and a long ivory horn that had a slight curve upwards. My lord, said Arin on top of his own unicorn. A brown one with green eyes and a dark horn that seemed like ebony. To think this savage land has these creatures that were long believed to be extinct. Spread the word. I decree that harming the unicorns of Skagos is a crime punishable by death. I want these creatures to be protected. Any man that finds one and brings it to us will be rewarded, said Kale while they enjoyed their long trek under the snowy mountains northwest of their camp. Arin nodded and went to the remaining men following them to spread his commands. The first day of the journey was quite easy. It wasn't snowing too heavily, so Kale could enjoy the vast white plains of snow. He felt like he was exploring Skyrim in real life. There was something calming and relaxing about the sight. The sky was clear and the wind felt welcoming. They treaded past interesting rock formations that looked like archways. It really felt magical and otherworldly for many of them that never left Essos. It might be weird to think that a Valyrian would call this place magical after living in the Freehold where they had literal magic and dragons. But there was something about the nature of this place that gave that feeling. They camped by the base of a mountain, and interestingly enough, the unicorns stood close to their riders, like they were protecting them from the cold nights. Precious creatures indeed. The second day was more challenging. They started treading up a mountain, and they had slowed down due to the snow and ice. But the scouts already had an efficient path created towards their destination. They went through a gorgeous pine forest, and Kale spotted another creature that he didn't think he would see in Westeros, a fox. Commander Arin, he shouted. Yes, my lord. Arin came riding fast towards his side. Those creatures, he pointed to the red fluffy fox digging a small hole in the snow under a tree. Send some men later to find out their habitat. I want to know how many of those exist in this land. If there's too few under the risk of extinction, they will also be part of the protected species like the unicorns. Arin nodded, but he was confused. As you will, my lord. But if I may, why are you so insistent on keeping these animals alive? Because I want to preserve the nature of this place. Due to the existence of the 14 flames, we have no animals back in the Freehold. If you don't count dragons and fireworms, the only other animals that we have are from outside that are brought in. So, for now, prevent the men from harming those little ones until we discover how many there are. The journey continued for another day. After treading carefully at the edges of a long, deep ravine, they reached the entrance to the hidden grove. Tying up the horses to nearby trees, 50 men stood behind by the entrance of the cave, which was big enough for a mammoth to enter, while the other 50 went ahead to check if there was anything dangerous. Once confirmed that everything was clear, the main host led by Kale and Arin went inside. The tunnel was large and spacious enough for their numbers. No one felt squeezed against rock and ice. They walked for almost 30 minutes until the tunnel opened into a massive cavern. The ground down here wasn't white of snow or gray and brown of rocks. It was green. A beautiful grove indeed, covered in piper's grass. plants and flowers everywhere, many trees with different shapes and colors, barks of ebony, sentinel trees, pine-like trees such as the ones in the forest they went past a day ago, and lemon trees. There was a small pool of dark, cold water in the center, and right behind it was a huge tree with bone-white bark and long twisting branches with 5-pointed blood-red leaves. Carved on the bark there was a face with blood-red eyes with red tears, as if crying blood. Kale looked up and saw that there were many holes in the ceiling of the cave, which made the sunlight pass through unimpeded, which added a mystical charm to this place. "This is a godswood," he said out loud. "Godswood?" asked Arin. "It's related to the First Men, a religion of sorts. Many castles in Westeros have a godswood, and they pray to the old gods, but it's more common in the north." "I thought that the so-called Faith of the Seven was the Westerosi religion," said one soldier casually, not really talking back to Kale, just thinking out loud. "I," answered Kale anyway. "But different kingdoms have different gods. The old gods are the oldest religion in their land, and the main northerner religion. The North is not the only kingdom in Westeros that have their own religion. The Iron Islands, for example, follows the drowned god." They walked around the godswood. The soldiers dispersed and started to form a perimeter around the area, leaving Kale, Arin, and 3 Magi alone, peacefully in the center of the place. Kale approached the weirwood tree and stared at it with a frown. He honestly liked the old gods the most. Different from the other gods, the old gods didn't seem to have an agenda. However, the children of the forest always made him feel weird. They seemed peaceful, sad, and melancholic. But that doesn't add up. As Bran thought during the books, if anyone else were driven to the point of near extinction by another, they would feel hatred, vengefulness, pure wrath. One could say that the children of the forest were peaceful folk and would just cry until their end, without fighting back. But they are living beings like any other. They should have survival instincts. Even a tiny, innocent pup will bite back when cornered. Kale proceeded to remove his right Valyrian steel vambrace, handing it to Arin, who caught it suspiciously, without a clue about what his lord was doing. Then Kale removed his right leather glove and placed it under his left armpit. After rolling his dragonhide sleeves past his elbow, he signaled to the Magi to come closer and bring the ornate amphora that contained dragon blood. "Do as I taught you during our trip," he commanded the 3 and extended his right arm to them. They nodded and took a few brushes from their robes, dipped them in the dragon blood, and started painting weird-looking runes all over Kale's forearm. It took them a whole hour to do it properly. Then Kale went on one knee, to the shock of Arin. But before the commander could complain, one of the Magi came closer and painted another rune on Kale's forehead before bowing respectfully, closing the amphora and retreating. After that, Kale stood up and walked closer to the weirwood tree. "I don't know what will happen, so be prepared." To which Arin nodded nervously. Kale slowly extended his hand towards the heart tree and started whispering inaudible words. No one could understand what he said. It was more like a chant. As his hand drew closer to the bark, the blood runes on his forearm started glowing one after the other. He frowned, having a weird feeling of impending doom. And once his hand touched the bark, all the runes on his forearm evaporated instantly, and the blood rune on his forehead lit up, forcing him to instantly take a step back, almost falling on the ground, panting, pale, and with panic on his handsome face. "How?" he mumbled. "My lord," said Arin, approaching him to help him. "Stop," shouted Kale in return. "Don't get close to this tree. Don't let anyone close to this damn tree from now on. This is an order. If you disobey, I will behead you myself," he said solemnly. Everyone gulped. Arin nodded nervously and took a step back. Kale took a long breath and recollected himself, unfolding his sleeve slowly while thinking of what he just discovered, with narrowed eyes. He turned to walk away from the tree, but he noticed something. Something was not right. Something was odd, strange, out of place. "Go ahead and leave this place. I will be done shortly," he said, trying to mask his nervousness and the urge to look around, pretending that everything was all right. But Arin couldn't even complete his words before Kale interrupted him. "This is an order." "Yes, my lord." Arin just sighed and shouted to his men, "Let's move out. We will be in the tunnels waiting for the lord to return." All soldiers looked at one another in confusion, but they had to follow their orders, so they quickly left the place. Now alone in the hidden grove, Kale slowly turned his gaze back to the heart tree. His left hand went behind his back and he pulled out his sharp rondel dagger. He slowly and subtly poked each one of his 5 fingertips of his right hand until they all started bleeding. It looked like he was nervous about something and was poking his fingers to decrease his own stress with pain. He then started walking around the grove, like he was just exploring the place, He spent over 10 minutes walking aimlessly around the place until he went to the one spot left for him to explore. The moment he stepped on that spot, he instantly extended his hand in a grasping motion. The blood in his fingertips ignited in flames that seemed to be swallowed by an invisible void. An invisible void right where he was grasping. He spoke slowly with narrowed eyes. So who is it? Bloodraven? Bran Stark? Or some other nameless rat that decided to come here to see what I did? He said with a somber tone. It doesn't matter. This will teach you to respect my privacy. Just because you can go back in time and explore countless secrets, it doesn't mean that you are entitled to know my secrets. There was no response, no sound, but the suction quickly stopped after a few seconds. His fingertips stopped burning, and his wounds closed and cauterized due to the flames. He sheathed his rondel dagger, put back on his black leather glove, and walked out of the grove with a wicked grin on his face. Chapter 21. Camping for the night. After getting out of the hidden grove area, walking through the dark rock corridor that was lit up by his soldiers' torches, Kale finally eased his worries a bit, although his grin was still on his lips. "My lord, are you finished there?" asked Arryn, understanding not to ask what happened. If Kaleres wanted him to know, he wouldn't have asked them all to leave. We will rest in here for the night and then ride back to the camp in the morning." Kale stretched his hand to his commander, who understood and gave his vambrace back. "Have any of the scouts found the volcano location, Commander?" Kale asked while tying his armor back to his right forearm. "No, my lord, but we have suspicions. After a whole week of interrogating our prisoners, not that they helped much, we did make some discoveries," answered Arryn while they walked towards the small camp that was being raised inside the tunnels. "Do tell. We believe that it's by Housekrell, the ruler of a village castle named Deep Down. Its name is self-explanatory. We believe they are nearby deep cavernous formations by the mountain chain. Near the center of the island, those caves are probably connected to this place, which would make sense considering how that Godswood felt warm and comfortable. House Magner, however, is on the southeastern coast. They ruled a place called King's House," said Arryn while pausing to take a breather. "Quite a pompous name for a savage civilization," said Kale sarcastically. Arryn in turn chuckled. "Indeed, my lord. But they were the strongest house on this island. Their military was made of at least 500 men, all well-trained warriors, with an extra 1,000 levies. So, it would make sense that they would pick the best place to settle down considering their power. Therefore, they went for building a port town so they could thrive from whales and trading with the mainland." "What about the third one?" Kale had to ask. He wasn't an expert on Skagos. Neither the show nor the books explained anything about this place. "The third house is the weakest. They settled on the western coast of the island, possibly to live off of the fishing through the Bay of Seals. They are the only house in this place with perfect access to that place. The only nearby settlement from the northern kingdom would be Eastwatch by the sea, but said the place has no ships or personnel." "I see." One house went for survival through the Bay of Seals, while the other went for trading and whaling. Both close to the shores, which is the most optimal location for any settlement. It prioritizes fresh water and source of food, said Kale. "Exactly, but even with all the possibilities, House Krall decided to move to the heart of the island. It raises the question, why?" said Arryn with a knowing smirk. "And which settlement is the closest to our camp?" asked Kale. "King's House is a day and a half away from the settlement. Driftwood Hall is 5 to 7 days if we follow the western shore and have no inconvenient encounters. Deep Down, however, is unknown. We have no idea of its exact location, and considering that it's surrounded by mountains, we don't know the fastest or even the right path to reach there." Kale nodded and sat down by a bonfire that was ready to be ignited. One of the soldiers was already procuring the flint and steel, which made Kale just chuckle and shake his head, pointing his finger to the bonfire and igniting it with magic fire, causing the poor soldier to become embarrassed in return. "You don't need to worry," said Kale with a friendly and welcoming voice. "I don't blame you. I haven't met anyone other than my sister that can actually create magic fire. If I was you, I wouldn't even consider it either. He chuckled again and signaled the soldiers to approach and rest surrounding the big bonfire. He wasn't lying. Even fire mages needed a source of fire in order to turn it into magic fire. Either that or some sort of sacrifice, like blood. Valyrians without dragons can't just snap their fingers and ignite things like firebenders. Well, most of them aren't, he said while grabbing a bowl of stew from the soldiers that had been preparing the food. When we get back to the camp, I want you to split your men. Send 500 to King's House and 500 to Driftwood Hall. I want you to take over those places. Aron nodded and sat down with his own bowl. As you command, my lord. Thanks to the latest ships that arrived, we are already 2,000 strong. I believe 1,000 armed soldiers will keep the prisoners in line. But what do you want to do with the local population? Slavery? No, Kale answered instantly without hesitation. Slavery will be the treatment for those who raise arms against me. Commoners don't care who rules them as long as they have food to eat and a warm place to live. But I want you and your men to check if they are indeed savages and cannibals as I've heard, or if those are just rumors. If they are indeed cannibals, they can't be used even for slaves. They will become blood sacrifices. Aron nodded while swallowing his food. I take it that you will be flying to Deepwood. Kale grinned. Why, of course. A settlement between the mountains can be hard to locate through regular means, but it sticks out like a sore thumb to a dragon rider in the skies. Sore thumb? Aron was clueless about his liege's words. Kale gulped his food and his eyes went wide, finally realizing that he has been using some of his old world's wordings. He gave an awkward cough, when you hurt one of your fingers and it becomes all red or purple, and you can instantly recognize it even when among the other fingers. Aron chuckled in response. It's a fitting description. I like it. The soldiers started laughing and telling weird jokes among themselves, enjoying their free time, which made Kale raise his eyebrows. Aron, what do the soldiers do when they camp is like this? How do they keep entertained? The commander shrugged. We often just drink, sing, tell jokes and things like that. Not much entertainment to be done in a temporary camp. Kale laughed and stood up. He went to his things and grabbed a fancy empty pot with a round body, long neck, and a 3-inch diameter mouth, along with a small pouch and his rondel dagger. Listen up, he shouted, getting the attention of all his men that started to think they would have to start moving again due to a change in plans. That reaction made Kale laugh even more as he placed the pot on the ground, took 10 steps from it, and used his rondel to draw a line on the floor. Everyone was confused about what their lord was doing. This will be our game for this evening, he said with a smile on his face. Anyone can try. All you have to do is manage to toss a coin inside that pot. He pointed towards the pot. While standing behind this line, the soldiers were a bit enticed, but they didn't really get excited about it. Now, if you miss it, you can't get your coins back. But if you manage to do it, not only you will get all the coins on the floor, but you will also get. He paused while grabbing a few coins from his pouch. 10 Valyrian dragons, he said as he placed 10 gold coins inside the pot. Anyone interested? He grinned as he turned to his men. Everyone lost their minds. 10 Valyrian dragons were equivalent to a whole month of payment for their services. Added to the remaining coins, they could earn big. Now remember, one at a time. And once the coin is tossed, it can't be taken back. He chuckled and walked back to his seat, grabbed a bottle of wine and filled his own goblet. You all have 3 hours, lads, he shouted. In 3 hours, if no one gets it, the house wins. He laughed and pointed towards himself and started drinking his wine while enjoying the show. Aron came and sat by his side, laughing at the men fighting one another to toss their money in the pot and earn big. This will be an entertaining evening, my lord, he said while Kale gave him a bottle of wine as well so they could laugh at the soldiers. Well, after the events of earlier, I wanted to have some entertainment to lighten up my mood. Getting the lads to have fun alongside it is just hitting 2 birds with 1 stone, Kale replied before drinking his wine. My lord, about that tree. Aron was quite reluctant about talking about it. I'm disappointed, Aron. Very disappointed, he said while looking at the fire. The sounds of coins falling on the ground seemed to get muffled. My lord, I always thought that, among all the gods outside Valyria, the old gods would be the ones that I could at least welcome, not as a faithful believer but as welcomed guests to our new land here. But Kale stood in silence, staring at the flames while remembering what he felt on the carved weirwood tree. Echoes, thousands, tens of thousands, swallowed by the weirwood, forever bound to its net, he absent-mindedly said while staring at the fire. His eyes seemed to glow red due to the reflection of the flames. Echoes? Net? Kale shook his head. It's nothing. Just don't let people near it. I would have burned it, but I want to study it further and more cautiously in the future. And we might not find another heart tree like that in this place. Leave it to me, my lord, by the way. Bring our unicorns. They kept us warm when we camped outside. Let them enjoy the warmth while we are inside. I want Aaron to enjoy his time with his rider, Aaron. You named the unicorn? Aaron was confused and amused. Why not? I named my dragon, and have no doubt that unicorn is now mine and no one else has the right even to get close to him. Kale smirked. I see. Aaron was chuckling amused. I'm sorry, my lord, but I think Aaron is a female. Kale stared at Aaron with wide eyes. Shit. Oris then, and don't let that stinky unicorn of yours get close to her. I will castrate him if he tries anything funny. Aaron couldn't hold it anymore and started laughing out loud. Oh, this is too much, my lord. He was tearing up. If you had a daughter to be courted, I wonder how would it be? Kale gave a sinister grin. The boy would need a bigger dragon than mine, and to survive my dragon fire. He then made a sad face. Lucky for them that my bloodline can only procreate within our own people. Then why do you look sad about it? I wanted to see them try. Chapter 22. Heart of Skagos. The journey back was overall uneventful. Kale was looking incredibly tired and a bit down for the first couple of days, but his soldiers managed to cheer him up with the gambling game that he came up with. He didn't know how much the soldiers liked that game. On the second night when they were camping, the soldiers asked if they could borrow the pot he used when he taught the game to them. And from that day forth, the game known as Golden Pot, or Pot of Gold, came to existence, much to his amusement. Oris was a faithful and loyal unicorn, always by his side during the cold winter nights of Skagos. Those little gestures made him happy. When one only looks far ahead, one tends to ignore the little things along the way, and many of those little things are, sometimes, as important as the end goal. Now the host was already seeing the wooden walls of their main camp on the horizon. My lord, it seems our little adventure is coming to an end, said Aaron with some melancholy in his voice. Kale chuckled. Well, it's not like it will be the last. Don't worry, my friend. The world is big and I won't be exploring it all alone. He patted Commander Aaron on the back. That's true. How long until your vassals move in on their entirety, my lord? He asked. Kale started thinking about it. The plan is to slowly move my men over the course of 5 years. First, I'll send the army to get us situated and protected. Then the slaves, not all of them, but I will select the better half. Then will come the specialists such as builders, crafters, cooks, brewers, sculptors, alchemists, and the remaining of the healers. Once we have a place settled, I will ship my vassals here. We have plenty. Valyria is big and I have over 10 vassal families. I just don't think I can bring them all here without getting the attention of the other Dragonlord families. Aaron was in deep thought. Do you really believe in the Targaryen girl? You know, about the destruction of Valyria? Kale just shrugged. In some ways I do. Those words made Aaron a bit scared. Remember, Aaron, destruction doesn't always mean extinction. Did you know about the twin dragons of the Belarus family? He said, trying to ease his commander's worries. To which Aaron shook his head. 2 firstborns of the most powerful dragon rider family came to life at the exact same time, from 2 different wives. Tell me, doesn't that spell disaster? Aaron went pale when he finally understood. The Tharn family was vassal of the Regal Lions for centuries. They obviously were knowledgeable about a few things about their history. The old Belarus will do his best with the time he borrowed to try to curb this conflict, but when there are ambitious men on the helm, conflict is doomed to happen. Families have fallen for less, he said while they kept moving closer to the camp with their soldiers behind them, maintaining a comfortable silence that eventually eased Aaron's worries. They would be long gone by then, so there was nothing to worry about. As they entered the camp, all their men saluted them with respect. It seems that during the week they were away, they managed to improve the situation here. Even with the newly arrived troops and personnel, Aaron kept looking towards the camp with a happy smile on his face. I wonder how my family will react when they come over. Will they enjoy the cold and snow? Or miss the freehold? Kale chuckled. Well, your family is one of the most loyal to me. I plan on naming them a noble house when you move over. House? Aaron raised an eyebrow. Like Westerosi lords? The noble part wasn't an issue. His family was already a noble one, albeit not Dragonlords. Since we will be living here, we should at least adapt a bit. And let's be honest, it's easier to identify families when you can just memorize their banners and coat of arms instead of having to know every single person. Valyria never adopted the heraldry culture, which is sad. Letting out an amused laugh, Aaron replied, I guess you are right on that, my lord. So will you become Kalares of House Regal Lion? What will be your heraldry? Looking up, Kale took a few seconds to think about it. A 2-headed silvery white dragon spewing red flames on a black field. He took a pause, thinking. 2 heads to represent me and my sister. The silverly white is to represent our Valyrian traits and origin. The red fire is to represent our magic and power. The dragon represents. Well, that one is obvious, isn't it? What about the black field? Is there a reason, or is it just because Dragonlords love that color? Arin asked, actually curious. Smirking at Arin's curiosity, he replied, well, one can't go wrong with wearing black, but there is a reason for it. The black represents the fate of my enemies, and what will be left of them when they raise arms against us, coal and ash. His eyes narrowed as he said the final words. What he didn't say is how he wanted the two-headed dragon to look like. He would mirror the two-headed eagle that represented the Holy Roman Empire. The Valyrian freehold itself was inspired by Rome of old, from its rise to its fall, and that banner would be his own symbolism of his origin that no one in this world would understand. I wonder how my house banner will be then, Arin said while touching his chin. I can't use a dragon, so I need to think about something that would represent us. That made Kale laugh. Well, I have time to think about it, and when we build our own place, I will make sure to build a cozy little corner for you as well, Galen, he said as he patted the brown unicorn he was riding, which earned him a happy unicorn sound from his faithful steed. Galen? You named your unicorn? Asked Kale, even more amused. Why, of course. If my lord does it then, so should I. Don't you think? On top of that, Galen is such a good boy, he said, almost as if pampering the horned mount. Yeah, he is a dog dude all right. Kale was laughing while watching the interaction of his commander and his unicorn. Ironically, Oris seemed a bit jealous of Galen and wanted attention too, so she obviously voiced her desire, which made Kale laugh even louder. Why don't you go for a unicorn heraldry then, Arin? He said while patting Oris. What a good cute girl she was. A unicorn, you say? That's not a bad idea, he said as if he started to contemplate the idea. Once they stopped moving, everyone went to their tents. The journey was long and cold. The soldiers wanted to eat and rest, and so did Kale. The next day, Kale woke up early to put on his armor. He equipped himself properly with his sword, a knapsack with emergency necessities and fresh water, and left his tent. After reaching Neltharion's little pen, he walked to his dragon who was already waiting for him. Once his items were all safe inside the leather satchel on the back of the saddle, Kale sat down comfortably. All right, buddy, let's see if we can find an actual comfortable place for you to rest. If there are no volcanoes here, he sighed, then this was all a waste of time. Let's go. Neltharion grunted and flapped his wings, taking to the skies and flying fast toward the center of the island. They were pretty high in the skies, but Kale could still watch the land below. They were not moving at full speed, where everything blurs. The mountain range was massive, the snow-covered peaks, ice-cold waterfalls connected to rivers that ran between mountains. It was beautiful but impossible to be settled, not unless they reshaped the land with magic, but that was no easy feat. Kale had a guess that at least half of the landmass of this island was enveloped by mountains. The closer he got to the heart of the island, the taller the mountains would be. It was reaching a point of ridiculousness. It was like the center of the island was surrounded by a mountain range as tall as the throat of the world from Skyrim. Commanding Neltharion to go up and above the mountains, both dragon and rider started feeling incredibly uncomfortable with the cold and lack of air. Kale couldn't even use his own fire to keep himself warm here due to the low oxygen. Once they finally passed through the mountain, both the dragon and rider were shocked. Beyond the ring of ice peaks that touched the clouds, there was a huge valley of green grass, with beautifully colored plants, trees, and crystal-clear rivers. The scene was magical. Who would have guessed that those mountains protected this place from the snow and cold? Does it make any sense? He didn't know. Probably not. But again, he was flying on top of a dragon and he could breathe fire. As they started descending to a comfortable altitude while moving forward, Kale was observing the rolling plains of green and grassy hills. The grass was green and healthy and looked like a perfectly flat green carpet from this altitude. Rivers dividing the land, with vast patches of forests and others of green mountainous regions that reminded him of the Scottish Highlands from his previous world. The closer he got to the center of what he called Greenlands, the warmer it got. Neltharion was aesthetic at this feeling and started to fly faster, partially ignoring his rider's commands. Once they reached the center of the area, Kale found a massive hole in the ground. It was like a chasm that went deep into the earth, so big that it could swallow a whole city the size of King's Landing, and still have room for Volantis, Old Town, and White Harbor. Commanding the dragon to fly above the round-shaped chasm, Kale looked down and was surprised by what he saw. Down below was a massive lake, with all the rivers of the region pouring down the huge hole. Taking a closer look, he noticed that there were many holes in the walls at the lake's height. Probably some underground rivers that connect to the rest of the island's rivers. That was not all. The whole lake down below had steam coming out of its surface, creating a layer of mist between the grassy land above and the deep lake below, as if it was extremely hot. So, this is why they call this place Deep Down, said Kale in realization. There must be volcanic formations underground the lake. And considering how the whole area is so warm and comfortable, he gulped. The layer of lava beneath this place must be absurdly huge. Suddenly he remembered that Winterfell had hot springs and his eyes went wide. Is the river of lava below so big that it connects this place to Winterfell, or is this a different one? The duo of dragon and rider kept scouting the whole area, and it was huge. The more Cale discovered about this place, the happier he got. He was excited about what kind of society he could build here. This place was legendary. He then looked at the huge circular mountain range that hid and protected this place from outside interference. Even the mountain range around this place is perfect. It's the best natural defense against dragons, as only extremely experienced riders with strong dragons can actually fly above those peaks. He then looked at the huge chasm, and that is the perfect dragon pit. It's so massive that we can house all the dragons in there. We just need to open huge caves on the sides so they can have their own room to rest while they are not flying above. He grinned, and with those mountains, no one from outside will see our dragons flying, and no dragon of ours will be able to wander outside. They would never volunteer themselves to that cold and uncomfortable altitude. This place is perfect. Come on, Neltharion. Let's find the human settlement of this place. A loud dragon roar echoed through the hidden valley as they flew into the distance. Chapter 23, Valyrian Festival. It took a whole week for Cale to return to the camp from his trip to the center of the island. He didn't really attack any settlement. With a dragon in hand, all he could do is burn and destroy. Being alone would be a challenge to take over even with Neltharion as deterrence. He did, however, manage to have aggressive diplomacy with a few scattered men that he found roaming around the Greenlands, but he decided to give it another official name. He also decided the name of his new kingdom. The name Skagos would be forever erased from the world after his takeover. What is aggressive diplomacy, one might ask? Well, when it comes to Cale, it means finding people, using Neltharion to scare the bejesus out of them, and forcing them to answer questions, or else they might get lost one day and find themselves inside a dragon's stomach. Cale was smart enough to pick single targets. He didn't really go for the kill or anything. Those would be his future people, and killing civilians just because he could would cause more harm than good. Just ask Daenerys Targaryen. It was easier with single targets. They would undoubtedly go to the village castle named Deep Down, seat of House Crowl, and spread the word, but who would believe a single man? Even if they did, the fact that he survived at least would show those with a bit of a brain that the dragon rider didn't come to destroy. House Crowl was already in shambles. They were the first to have contact with his men, way before he even got to the island, before that damn conclave even. Those peasants were no threat. His biggest achievement was that he was able to map most of the area. The surface of the Greenlands was completely drawn on a map and showed key known tunnels that had access to the outside world. Leaving this place was one of the hardest things for Cale to do. Not because he didn't want to, or because this place was beautiful, but because of his damn dragon. Neltharion didn't want to leave here at all. It took him a whole day to make Neltharion see reason. A Targaryen king once said, the idea that we control the dragons is an illusion, or will say in the future. Once he returned to the camp outside, the first thing he did was order a horde of slaves to bring massive amounts of food for Neltharion. The dragon was very grumpy. Then he informed Aron Tharn and his men of his discovery. Everyone was shocked and ecstatic. The idea that such a perfect place existed in this iceberg, called an island, was a great relief for them. During his week away, Aron and his men managed to take over King's house, and he just got a message a day prior that they reached Driftwood Hall. Cale was also surprised by what they encountered in the western part of the island. A whole bloody forest of weirwood trees that created what looked like a bubble around the area, where no snow would taint the ground, keeping the rocky but green area perfect for a settlement. King's house, on the other hand, was as ordinary as one would think. The one thing they had was easy access to the Shivering Sea. With no pirates whatsoever, their whaling ships brought more food than they needed, except during harsh winters, of course. Their superiority over the other two places was their contact with the world outside Skagos. King's house could import goods and resources from both White Harbor and Bravos almost unimpeded, which made their houses warmer and better built, their walls thicker, and House Magner had a proper castle. Unlike the Crowls that lived in houses of a stone-built first floor with wooden second and third floors, with flat roofs, and most buildings had 2 or 3 stories high. As the Stains, who had their settlement built on mainly wood and thatched ceilings, most single-story with only the castle having 2 floors. If put in Skyrim terms, Deep Down would be similar to Rift Inn, Driftwood Hall would be similar to Falkreath, and King's House would be Dawnstar. Perhaps I should rename them that in the future, he thought as he kept writing the details about the island in a leather-covered book, so his sister would have access to his findings once she arrived. The number of children of the forest prisoners also increased during his absence. Currently, they had 3 and 10 children of the forest locked in chains, with at least 7 to 10 more to arrive from Driftwood Hall. Kale made sure to spread the word to capture every single one of them that they find, and to report the location of every pale white tree with blood-colored leaves that had a face carved on it that they find. And guess what? He already had the location of at least 6 different ones, 3 of which Aaron went himself to check out and reported that none of them were as big as the one in the hidden grove so far. Today was a special day for his people. They were all in an empty area inside the safety of their walls while everyone around was drinking and feasting, singing and playing Golden Pot. "My lord," said Aaron as he approached Kale with a huge smile while carrying a barrel on his shoulders. After placing it down, Aaron brought 2 tankards and filled them with dark Valyrian stout and handed one to Kale. "Merry Dragonflame Festival, my lord." Kale in return started laughing. Honestly, I had no idea that we had a festival for the first day of the new year." "Oh, so, the stories were true? That you lost your memory almost a year ago?" asked Aaron while drinking from his tankard. My friend, I've heard that the past me was meek and book-smart, but never a man of action," he laughed while drinking as well. Aaron shrugged. "I can't say anything about it, my lord. Haven't met you before this trip, but I heard that you were quite a recluse." Everyone was drinking and chatting happily when a group of shirtless men approached the center of the vicinity. They had body paints that seemed like dragon scales of different colors. They carried long torches and had small jugs tied to their sashes. "I didn't know we had all of this," said Kale as he watched the painted men igniting their torches on fire, taking a mouthful of whatever was inside the jugs and spitting on the flames, creating long and colorful breaths of fire that colored the whole place. From red to indigo to yellow-gold flames, the painted men were cheered enthusiastically. "Valyria doesn't have many special days, but the first day of each year is special to us. It means one more year of a successful empire," cheered Aaron, completely immersed in the colorful flames. "And when I was young, I always wanted to be one of those fire dancers, my lord." Kale laughed merrily. "You wanted to be painted like a dragon and dancing half-naked?" he asked teasingly while eating salted pork and drinking his dark stout, which was the Valyrian version of ale. Aaron laughed with pride too. "My lord," exclaimed an excited Aaron, "but what I wanted was to play with the colored flames. I always wanted to spit fire through my mouth like the dragons." Kale kept laughing and enjoying the day. This was a very bare-bones celebration because of their location and lack of proper resources to pay respect to a new year. Kale really wanted to experience how this festival was celebrated back in Valyria, but for some reason, Kale felt that no festival would be as special as this one that he was experiencing at this moment, bare bones or not. "You know, this will be one festival that we will keep alive, my friend," said Kale with a smile. "Even if the whole doom comes, Valyrian culture will be alive with us. We are Valyria." Aaron stared at Kale with wide eyes for a few seconds, and then their tankards clinked one another. "My lord. We are Valyria." His voice was a bit louder than normal due to his drunk self, so of course, most people heard it and started chanting enthusiastically. "We are Valyria. We are Valyria. We are Valyria." Kale was laughing and drinking, and he even spent some time playing Pot of Gold with his men this time, which he failed and lost miserably, but even after losing he had a happy smile on his face. "My lord," said a slightly drunk young man approaching him. Kale instantly recognized him. It was the young man that got embarrassed by his fire magic igniting a bonfire when they were in the Hidden Groves cave that day. He had golden eyes and the typical Valyrian platinum hair down to his shoulders. He was young, looking around 7 and 10. "My lad, how can I help you?" said Kale with a smile, ignoring the fact that a regular soldier walked towards him like that. He wasn't really from this world, so he was more open to ignoring some social protocols. Is it true that you can spit fire like an actual dragon?" asked the lad with slightly unfocused eyes, showing how drunk he was. Many officers were already pissed at the boy's attitude, but Kale's smile and easygoing personality prevented them from acting. The moment that their lord showed any annoyance, they would lock that soldier up for insubordination and disrespect towards his liege. Kale laughed and nodded in return. Even Aaron was shocked by the revelation. Yes, there were rumors, but rumors were just that. The moment his lord confirmed it, things changed. "Can you show us?" said the lad enthusiastically. "My lord," said one of the officers while standing up, "I apologize for the lack of proper decorum from my men. He will be spending his next days in a cell to repent for his disrespect." Waving his hand, Kale just settled down the situation. "It's fine. I don't take it negatively." He stood up, raised his tankard of ale and shouted, "Who wants to see a true dragon fire?" Everyone cheered and raised their drinks in return, and the celebration started to get wilder and wilder. Kale walked towards the improvised stage where the fire dancers were doing their show of incredible talent. Everyone stopped what they were doing and kept their eyes on their lord. Today was the day that they would confirm if the stories were true or not. But according to Kale's demeanor and chill appearance, they were looking forward to a show. Standing in the middle, with the fire dancers so kindly giving him space, Kale handed his half-full tankard to one of them. "Hold this for me," to which the man with dragon scale paintings nodded excitedly. Taking a deep breath, Kale closed his eyes. "All right, Neltharion. Let's show our men how strong our combined flames are," he said while connecting himself with his dragon, who all the way from his lair raised his head, huffed green smoke from his snout, and closed his eyes in return. A few seconds passed. The crowd was staring in silence, waiting for it. Once Kalari's regal lion opened his eyes, everyone gasped in shock. What were once bright, almost glowing purple eyes turned into fiery emerald irises with slit pupils that glowed like bright torches even under the sunlight, and green smoke seemed to come out of his eyes as he stared at everyone and then faced up. "Dracaries," he thought to himself. Ruoyawawir, a loud dragon-like roar came out of Kalari's mouth, and a wave of emerald fire painted the skies above the settlement. Chapter 24. City Planning. It took almost a whole day for Kale to wake up after the previous celebrations. One might think that he overdid it just like before, but after a whole year of practicing magic and learning, he would have been a complete idiot if he didn't know how to optimize his own magic output. Dragonfire would still cause him trouble if he did just like he did when he first rode Neltharion, but he discovered that he could borrow the magic from his dragon instead of doing it all by himself, which eased the backlash considerably. The drawback was that both he and Neltharion had to concentrate to make it happen. It took time and was impossible to do it in battle because of that so far. More needed to be learned and enhanced until he reached a point where he could just use his dragon's flames as his own. And that was if that was even possible. His current situation was already beyond the limits of being humanly possible. He couldn't warg on Neltharion, and he doubted he ever could consider how complex dragons were. But they were connected way more than any bonded dragon and their rider ever could be. His men weren't that worried, though. None of them actually knew how deadly his last backlash was. If Valinor or Vaila were here, he would be hearing some really nasty words. Right now, he was sitting by his desk with a pile of parchment, a large amount of ink pots and brushes of different sizes. With everything being solved by his men, he had plenty of free time until his sister arrived, time that he decided to spend practicing magic and planning his future kingdom. After drawing many sketches of different buildings, disliking them and throwing them on the floor before going back to draw another one, he was frustrated. Even Hogwarts was drawn and discarded for being too classic medieval. Why can't I think of a decent building style for my kingdom? He kept biting the end tip of his brush, with a frown on his forehead. Think, Kale. Think. He kept drawing medieval-style castles with round-shaped towers, but none of it looked unique. I don't want to just mirror Valyria. I want my own identity based on Valyrian architecture. How to do it? For hours he kept drawing different castles he remembered from his previous life. He even managed to draw Minas Tirith, but he didn't like it. Not enough room for dragons. He then made some simple sketches of Skyrim's holds and castles, but he didn't like any of them, not even the Imperial City. The center tower is good, but the rest? Not big enough for my people. The Nord holds have the same issues, and in all honesty, I don't want to replicate Skyrim. It was a great game, but not my favorite. He tried Dark Souls, but after a whole day, he just gave up. No one will be able to build this. Fucking Anerlondo is too complex. Grand for sure, but to build this would take centuries and an ungodly amount of money and resources. I can't spend everything on one city and leave everyone else living in temporary housing for 10 fucking decades. After spending a whole week drawing castles, almost giving up, he suddenly had a thought. Why don't I use another universe style that is not based on medieval times, but would fit? He started drawing round buildings mixed with square and rectangular shaped buildings. The focus was to draw one different building on each parchment. Some were grander, some were simpler, but all shared the same architectural design. His grin started growing wider and wider as he kept drawing a palace. He didn't want to copy King's Landing, honestly. Maegor's Holdfast was magnificent, and the Red Keep was a work of art, but he wanted his own thing, something that would be unique in this world. Once he finished drawing the castle, he placed it on a pile of other parchments that were all the ones that he made following the same design style, and started drawing a picturesque idea of how the view of the streets would be. This will capitalize on the Green Plains. It will become a landmark in Planetos. The latest movies suck. Hell, even the ones that came before suck. But this one city was a legend when it came to artistical design, and it did fit my Valyrian yet not Valyrian theme. After that was completed, he drew a top view of how he envisioned the city. Honestly, He wanted a circle like Valyria and Tyria, but the castle was bordering the chasm just like Red Keep was by a huge cliff. So he went for the next best and closest thing to it, a half-moon shape around the deep hole that would house all his dragons. I won't be keeping my dragons away from my capital. The Targaryens made that mistake. Well, in my opinion, the whole King's Landing was a huge mistake. They should have swallowed more of the land and taken over the Reach and Highgarden. That castle was already masterfully planned, huge and beautiful, and had the best and most prosperous land surrounding it. House Gardner was gone anyway. Why give it away to the fucking Tyrells? After such a long secluded time, Arryn came in wondering what his liege had been doing this whole time. Chaol barely went out like he used to. Most of his meals were sent here. Once he came inside the Lord's tent, he was shocked at how messy it was. Balls of parchment were all over the place alongside empty ink pots. Even the rugs on the floor were stained with black ink, and sitting by the desk was his disheveled lord staring at a pile of parchments like they were his treasure. "Am I, Lord?" asked Arryn, already a bit worried if his lord was sick. Chaol jerked up from his desk, jumping in fright, and then turned towards him with an angry glare. "You damn bastard. Don't jump scare me like that ever again," he shouted in anger. Arryn had to hold back his chuckle and got curious about another one of his lord's unique wording. "Jump scare? You scared me, and I jumped? Isn't that a jump scare?" he said while narrowing his eyes, but letting go. He was in too much of a good mood to be soured by an asshole. Arryn started chuckling. I apologize, my lord. It was just that you have been inside this tent for almost 2 weeks. We started to get worried. But even so, I wouldn't bother you if I didn't have a reason to. Your orders were clear. But it's been 2 weeks, as I said, and we received the message that the lady is already about to leave the freehold on her dragon." Chaol was aghast. "2 weeks? But I only started drawing this city a few days ago." He then stopped and looked around his messy room and chuckled wryly. "Or so I thought. Drawing a city?" Arryn was amused, but he was more curious than amused. Chaol nodded proudly and offered him a pile of parchments. "Here, take a look. I created different building styles for our future capital. I'm not living in a savage's castle for the rest of my days. And what's the point of fully taking over if I would have to tear it down and build it again to my liking anyway? It's better to start fresh, and more importantly, next to that chasm, to keep my dragons always close by." Arryn laughed at the term, savage's castle. He went there and saw all 3 castles of Skagos and had to admit, although King's house was somewhat decent, they were in no way, shape, or form enough to house dragons, and the rest of the buildings were not up to Valyrian standards either. They didn't even have sewers. His lord was right. It was better to start from scratch than having to demolish everything. After taking the pile of drawings, he kept looking at each one of them with a somewhat critical eye. He did know his lord could draw well since he made the maps of the center of Skagos, and it was incredibly useful to them. But it was the first time he was seeing such level of art. "My lord, these are amazing. They remind me of Valyria, but at the same time, they don't, right?" concluded Chaol with a happy smirk on his face. Arryn nodded repeatedly. "This palace is not as big as the capital thought." Chaol snorted and spat on the floor in disgust. "Why would I create things that huge just for me and my family? Just to have to walk a massive flight of stairs just to reach the privy? No, I refuse," he concluded while crossing his arms. "The stairs be damned, Arryn. Did you know the wall has elevators? Why we still walk on fucking stairs?" He lost it, shouting the final words. Arryn Tharn started laughing out loud. His family was a noble one, and they had a modest tower for themselves and many other normal-sized buildings. But he could still understand his lord's plight. Just looking at Regal Lion Tower was enough to make him gulp, imagining how many stairs there were in there. For no reason whatsoever. There were just 2 Regal Lions, and in history there were just a maximum of 5 Regal Lions in one generation, and that was thousands of years ago, during the War of Conquest against the Harpy Empire. "I actually agree with you, my lord. If those barbaric first men actually managed to build contraptions that replace stairs to go up and down that ice wall, we should have done the same." "I know, right?" Chaol exclaimed. "Once more of our forces come and settle the island, I want you to send one of those birds that the old castles have to the king of the Starks and tell them that we are from Valyria and want to have a good diplomatic relationship with them. Tell them that we want to study the contraptions at Castle Black, and we are willing to pay for it." Arryn nodded. Should I omit that we took over part of their land?" He chuckled as he asked. Chaol frowned and started to think. "Tell them that a Dragonlord family from Valyria wants to have a meeting with them. I will go east after my sister arrives, so you will have to let him know that it won't be that soon. But when I get back, I want to have a meeting. I will tell him that I took over Skagos myself, and if they declare war against me, I will show them how dangerous a Dragonlord truly is. Your will shall be done, my lord." I just hope we don't have to conquer the entire Westerosi North, so we can have peace here. Unless that is what you want. Kale shook his head no. Those lands have no value to me. Skagos by itself has little value to me as well. If it wasn't for those volcanic formations that is, I don't think the North has anything like that. They don't even understand what frozen fire is. They probably have no source of it, which means no volcano. Aron nodded as he kept looking through the drawings. This will be a beautiful city and castle if we manage to build it like you have envisioned, my lord, he said while looking at the picturesque art of how it would look completed, the final art. It took me weeks to put that together. I tried many others, but they looked just like any other Westerosi castle. And we nobles of Valyria can't have it like that, can we? Kale asked with a mischievous grin. Chuckling at his liege's antics, Aron agreed. We have our own people. We might settle in Westeros, but we are Valyrians. One should never forget one's roots. Have you thought of the name of the city? Kale looked upwards, fighting against his body to remain awake after spending so long immersed in his work. I could have called it Valyria or New Valyria, but that would sound pretty bad, wouldn't it? So, I thought long and hard and I came up with a name that would fit our Valyrian roots. Oh? Kale grinned. It will be called Valinor. Aron's eyes went wide. That's a really good name, right? Kale chuckled. Tolkien was great with everything he created. Names included. He eyed the piles of drawings. As for the city, I have another George to thank for that. Naboo was a beautiful place after all. The image that inspired me. Chapter 25. Final Touches. Valinor, a Naboo-inspired capital of Kale's new Valyrian kingdom, with domed round structures mixed with some standard rectangular and square ones. His vision was to divide the city into districts similar to how King's Landing would have the Street of Silks, Flower, Silver, Seed, Looms, Files, Steel, and other known locations such as alleys, lanes, squares, ways, and winds. The initial structure would be the royal residence. He thought of many obvious names that carried dragon in its name, but he decided to copy Skyrim for a bit, and also mirror the Targaryens. Where Westeros would have the Red Keep, his kingdom would have the Blue Palace, although the roof of the palace was a slightly bluish-purple instead of just blue. Using the rivers as natural divisions for his district, the first district he thought about would be the Noble District, which he named after his origin in this world, Valyrian District. This would be the one place where big towers almost as tall as the Blue Palace itself could be seen, albeit scarcely. Dividing the Valyrian district in half would be a long and large main paved road that would begin at the Blue Palace and end with a massive gateway named Dragon's Arch. The road would be called Regal Road. This road would be used for celebrations and parades, the good ones at least, and it would follow the color palette of the Blue Palace. The small patch of land that is surrounded by a forked river by the right side of the Valyrian district would become the area focused on magic, from training new sorcerers to creating artifacts. This one he completely ripped off from his favorite franchise and named Firelink Sanctuary. The main building of this district would be, as one could guess, the Firelink Shrine. That would have a massive underground structure that would reach the magma layer beneath the earth. Differently from the blue domed roofs from the previous district, this one would have red ones. The land to the Valyrian district's left would display its metallic silver domed roofs, and its name would be Silver District, the center of craftsmanship and trade of his capital. The main landmark of this particular district would be a huge square named Vaila Square, with a massive statue of two dragons flying in circles right on the center. This district will focus on mass-producing items. It will be the most industrialized area of the town. No small businesses here, but only big factories and reputable blacksmiths and armorsmiths that will be working directly for the crown. The third district would have dull dark gray domed roofs, and it would be named Tower District. Its main use would be the military barracks. Kale thought that it would be for the best to have proper training grounds and housing for his military force. He would never expand it absurdly, so allotting a decent-sized land for his army's training purposes would be for the best. On a small and separate segment of the Tower District there is the Steel Fort, a place dedicated for the city guard, which will be a completely separate force from the military, but it will have a big underground dungeon dedicated to building cells. The Steel Fort will be solely focused on keeping the streets clean and safe, well as much as possible. Another patch of land among the ones divided by rivers will be a dedicated and well-preserved walled forest/garden. It will be between the Firelink Sanctuary and the Tower District, to protect the carefully dedicated garden from common rabble, thieves, rapists, beggars, and other low-life citizens of his kingdom. The name of his choice was taken from one of his favorite games of all times. He called it Eversong Woods, a peaceful place where nobles, rich and respected sorcerers could go anytime to enjoy nature, hunt, in specific places dedicated for that activity, or do other activities away from the crowded streets of Valinor. The few buildings inside this area will have green domed roofs and will house the Ranger Corps, a dedicated force to fight and care for wildlife. Beyond those districts there will be a tall wall, dividing the city in half. Beyond the wall will be the biggest district of Valinor, called Stone District. It will be the Commoners District, where small folk would live and reside. Mostly inns and simple small businesses will be in this district. Most if not all known King's Landing streets will be present here, from Street of Silks to Streets of Steel. There will be a vast amount of empty lands in this district. It will be bigger than the other districts combined. Some small folk may even rent extra land for the sake of starting their own small farm if they have the money, and yes, it will be renting. One doesn't own land in this place. They rent it from the crown, and it will be with taxes included. The few chosen plots to be sold would be for reputable families that enriched the kingdom through the years. How one would get the money, one might ask. The main method would be to work at farmlands or mines owned by the crown or other nobles that own them. Or they may even pay their taxes and rent through labor directly. The main building in this vast district would be the Mithril Hall, a fancy name for a currency exchanging building with other town hall functions like registering all import and export that comes and leaves the city. Cale thought about his coins too. It will be gold crowns and silver circlets. The copper coins, however, were a nasty business thanks to George R. Martin. There was a total of 5 different copper coins, each one worth half of the previous one. The reason for that is the amount of bronze in each coin when balanced with tin. The more bronze, the higher on the scale. There was a reason for such horrendous economy, which was the amount of coins one can carry and how valuable certain precious metals were when compared to the job done. Cale decided to go with 2 different kinds of copper coins, the copper laurel, which was equal to 1 Westerosi copper star, and 1 copper pounce, which was equivalent to 1 Westerosi copper penny. Everything in between would have to be either rounded up or split down. The main reason why this district was named Stone District was because of the island, Skagos, which means stone in the old tongue of the first men. Beyond the Stone District, which had pale blue roofs similar to Naboo's standard roofs, was another wall. This one would be the main hassle if any army actually managed to get inside the Greenlands, now named Valinor Highlands, which was almost impossible considering that Cale would demolish all tunnels that connect this place with the external area of Skagos and build new ones, secret ones only known by the high echelon of his kingdom. The one known entrance will be a massive gate on the mountain, which will be built by his people. It will be very similar to the Bloody Gate from the Vale, but adding the northern cold to it, yeah. No army is marching this way. He will be keeping King's House, Driftwood Hall, and even deep down, Driftwood Hall has free access to the Bay of Seals, great for food. King's House is a great port town. He will expand those docks and turn it into a whaling and trading powerhouse. As for deep down, it will be used for a few reasons. One is, his city has no slums considering how he arranged it and how he will keep a tight hold on the capital. So he will use deep down as a slum area. It's not that far away and it already looks like Riften. The other reason is that he sees no way in which Skagosi will willingly leave their houses that easily. It's easier to do it slowly over time. After writing some more details about some extra castles to be built in certain strategic places of the Valinor Highlands, which were pretty big, about 2/3 of the inhabitable land of Skagos and 1/4 of the landmass if one counts the vast mountain range. I will need to send specialists to find which mountains possess a mine. This place is abandoned and backward, with volcanic formations underneath the island. I have no doubt that we have mines. It might not even just be gold and silver, but also precious stones considering how unique this whole place is. I can give the land to my trusted lords so they can mine and send 30% to me, keeping the remaining 70% for themselves. If there's only one lord with a mine it would sound bad, but if you consider 3 or more, I will be wealthy. Won't be building castles near unprofitable lands anyway. The real moneymaker would be certain Valyrian day-to-day items, from simple ones such as Valyrian wine, stout, fiber, silk, and spices, that he would have the sole monopoly of, and he didn't doubt that it would be exported all over Westeros and Essos, to more refined, noble items such as glasses and mirrors. No way I will be forging Valyrian steel and selling unless I'm deep red in debt. Cale narrowed his eyes and kept thinking. A smirk appeared on his face. I might even become one of the owners of the Iron Bank in the shadows. I will have the most powerful military force in the known world with my dragons. What if the lords who took their money didn't have a complicated family inheritance for them to manipulate? The threat of dragons is more than enough to make even a drunkard king pay his dues. He kept tapping his finger on his table. If I can't become one of the owners, I will start my own financial institution and I will crush them economically and by force. His eyes narrowed. They come from Valyria. All they own belongs to Valyria, and in a decade or so, I will be Valyria. My lord. A shout came from the entrance of his tent, forcing Cale out of his small world of planning to focus on Commander Arin Tharn that came inside with a smile. Lady Regal Lion should be arriving in a few hours. You asked me to let you know. Cale nodded. I will go take a bath to be ready to receive her then. he said as he closed the book that he was writing all the details in. A couple of hours passed, and the whole camp trembled at the roar of a mighty blue beast flying above the skies of Skagos. The dragon was lean and agile. His wingspan cast a shadow over the whole settlement, and everyone who looked up could see its bright, blood-red eyes staring down at them like a predator. The dragon landed in front of the camp, and from his back a gorgeous platinum-haired girl dismounted. She looked like a valiant warrior with her silver armor with details that resembled their lord's armor, and her long blue cape was tied to the back of her breastplate, and she had white fur around her collar. The blue gem on the pommel of her sheathed sword glowed for everyone to see. Image here. Kale, who was waiting in front of the gates with his men, was also donning his armor. He had a proud smile on his face when he saw his soon-to-be wife. She stepped before him and grinned, fire and blood. "Lord of Regal Lion," she said while staring at his eyes with a mischievous gaze. Kale grinned back and corrected her, "No. Valyria is behind us, and from now on it's, long may you reign. Your Grace," she chuckled at her brother's antics, "so I will be calling you like that from now on." "Your Grace," he shrugged, "or you can call me my love, or beloved husband, truth be told. The choice is all yours," he said as he approached her, touching her soft and warm cheek with his left hand. "There's no crown between me and my wife." He finished his words and kissed her fiercely, to which she replied in kind and wrapped her arms around his neck. They kissed for a long time, and Vainarin kept staring at the mob of soldiers, keeping them in check so they couldn't ruin the couple's moment. What a nice dragon. Their lips parted. Vaila stared deep into her brother's eyes. "I missed you so fucking much." Kale gave her a wry smile. "We have time. I will spend a week here with you to help you get situated." She narrowed her purple eyes. "You will be leaving me behind again?" Kale shook his head. "I will leave you ahead. This is where I will be coming back to. But I have to go there." "The other marked place?" Vaila frowned. "Shadowlands, ass high. What do you plan on finding in that godforsaken place?" Kale stared at her, and his pupils morphed into their slit, draconic mode as he answered with a wicked, toothy grin. "Power." The City District Division was based on this art of Theed. Naboo. Chapter 26. Last Days in Skagos. Kale spent a whole week teaching Vaila everything he knew about this island. He also introduced her to his commander and his men, letting them see who will be leading them for the time being. He also gave her tips on how to handle their soldiers, how to behave in front of people, whom to trust, and some do's and don'ts, which she obviously needed since she was educated from birth to be the lady of the family, and as a lady, she shouldn't have the need to go through any of that. That's the Lord's responsibility according to Valyrian and Westerosi culture. He also told her about his goal to demolish the known tunnels towards the Valinor Highlands and use their slaves to carve a new hole in that mountain, facing south. "I don't know how long I will be away. If I am lucky, it will be a fortnight. If I am not, several moons," he said as he was getting dressed after a steamy night activity with his soon-to-be wife. Vaila chuckled, but had a somewhat sad expression. "I didn't really want you gone, especially to a place like that," she said while she hugged the blankets while completely naked underneath. Turning his head toward his sister, Kale offered her a smile. "Don't worry, V. I will be carrying a glass candle all the time, and we will be able to communicate often. What I want you to do is take this as a unique opportunity. I won't be around, and neither will Valinor. You will be the ruler until I am back. Learn as much as you can." Vaila stared at Kale's eyes for a few seconds and smiled back. "Leave it to me. Since you lost your memory, you've changed so much. But I like you better this way, more assertive. You know what you want, and you know what must be done to achieve that," she concluded with a cute blush on her soft cheeks, while meekly hiding half of her face underneath the heavy winter blankets that were covering her. Letting out a loud and cheerful laugh, Kale approached her and gently touched her cheek. "I can't believe I didn't have you claimed before. To think that you had to wait so long." Her face grew hotter and hotter, and her skin was turning crimson. "But now you are mine, and I am a very, very possessive man." Vaila just nodded cutely, trying to hide her face. "What are the qualities of a dutiful wife, Vaila?" Kale asked out of nowhere. After gulping, Vaila stuttered a bit while responding. "To be loyal and faithful to their husband, to never dishonor their family, to bear children." Her voice was getting lower and lower the more she spoke. Kale chuckled and nodded. That's the qualities of a regular wife. Now tell me, what are the qualities of a regal lion queen?" Vaila was confused. She started to think for a bit. To help their king to keep the realm safe and stable? All she could hear was a snort in response. "That's what a council is for. A wife of mine needs a set of very specific qualities. All the regular dutiful wife's qualities, yes, but they also need to be." Kale stared deep into her eyes. "A queen in court, a dragon on the battlefield, and a whore in bed." She instantly turned red after listening to the final words. You already know how to be a queen in court with all of your upbringings. The whore in bed. He chuckled and grinned. You don't have to worry about that. I will help you out. In a few years you will be a master at that. Vaila snorted instantly with narrowed eyes. You better not have any more weird thoughts. What you did to me last night was not nice. She hit again, earning a shrug from Kale, who continued. As I was saying, he continued, completely ignoring her embarrassment. While I am gone, you will have the perfect opportunity to learn the one thing that you lack and what you can't rely on others for. You are a dragon, Vaila. Your flames might not be dragon fire, but you have dragon blood, true dragon blood. Unlike the other Valyrians who only have magic blood, and this island is where you will make that blood ignite. But what if I ruin your plans? She asked, doubting her own capabilities. Plans change, and the future will be more chaotic than just taking over an island. A dragon king needs a dragon queen by his side. You have everything you need to become that. Shred that doubt you have about yourself. So what if you fuck things up? Learn from it and improve it the next time. It's not like the world will lack chaos from which we will thrive. But no, Vaila, if even I changed, so can you. Now Kale was being quite unreasonable. Old Kalares never changed. He was gone. It's a completely different person, but he knew that she needed a push. He will sleep better at night knowing that she will have the resolve to do what is needed in the future, even if a little white lie was the key to achieving that future. Silence remained after Kale's final words. Vaila kept shifting her position underneath the blankets until her gaze finally met his, making him grin with satisfaction. I will do it. Leave it to me, she said with resolve. Although he knew it was a fleeting resolve, nothing stopped her now. The first step was taken. Once you leave, I will request Commander Aron to teach me the sword. I learned from Valinor while I was in the Freehold, but just like you, I think I have no aptitude for the sword. It's like my body is not right for it. She was expecting Kale to do one of his dramatic complaints again. Ever since he woke up that day, he has been complaining about being bad with the sword, but to her surprise his grin just grew wide. He took a tome from a trunk and tossed it to her. What is this? She asked, confused. A new thing that I created. It's a spell. He stopped. Damn, they have no concept of what a spell is. They just call it magic. Seeing her confused by his words, he coughed. A spell is how I call a certain application of magic. For example, the dragon breath is a spell. The burning lungs is another spell as well. I named it combustion. And that wave of fire that once came out of the tip of my cane was another spell, named fire surge. She nodded. I understand. But what is this one? He chuckled. That one is called Power Within and will help you out. After I trained the sword for a while, I noticed that it was like my body and mind were not in sync. It means acting together. It was like my instincts were behind my body, and my body wasn't reacting as I wanted. Her eyes instantly went wide in realization. For me too. I also felt like that. I just couldn't really put into words how I felt. Kale raised one eyebrow. Oh, as I expected. It seems our dragon blood and enhanced body is holding us back. We can't fully use it to its full potential. It's like something is missing. A key element. That's why I created that spell. It took me a while and I only finished it a few days before flying here. His eyes went solemn. Be careful with that magic, V. It's dangerous and can cause you to harm yourself in irreversible ways. Learn it carefully before using it in battle. She nodded in response, meeting her beloved's solemn gaze with her own. Leave it to me. I will do my best. I am glad that you found a solution to our problem. He shook his head. That's no solution. Not permanent anyway. It will help us, but at a cost. You will understand when you fully learn and master it. But I will find us a solution. It's one of the reasons why I am going to the Shadowlands. She nodded her head and kept staring at her brother putting his armor on. After a while she got up and while still naked, she helped him properly equip all the different plated parts of the armor. Don't take too long. I want more nights like last night, she whispered in his ear after mustering all her courage. He smirked and slapped her, but before walking out of the tent, carrying his sword in one hand and a large pack of provisions in the other, holding it over his shoulders. Letting out a growl at his action while rubbing the slapped area, she remembered something and instantly went to the cabinet, grabbing the easiest robes to dress in and putting on a pair of comfortable winter boots before she grabbed a box near her things and rushed out of the tent. The whole camp was staring at her with agape mouths. She was, by all means, in thin dressing robes which made it obvious what happened in that tent. Not that the poor souls that rested their heads on nearby tents wouldn't know. They had to bite their lips and go take a walk that night to avoid the loud moans and groans. Kale, she shouted, earning his attention by the time he reached the gates and Neltharion was already there waiting for their next adventure. V? What are you doing out here dressing like that? He was kind of angry now. He didn't like the kinds of gazes that his woman was getting from the nearby men. She stopped her jog when she arrived in front of him. Here, she said while presenting him with an ornate box. If you are leaving, I want you fully armored, she said with a serious expression. Kale grabbed the box, doing his best to not lash out at her because of her behavior, but once he opened it, he couldn't help but stare at her again. You came all the way here, dressed like that, just to give me this? I don't care how I am dressed as long as I can improve your chances of coming back alive, she said while staring at him. What is a few minutes of shame when compared to a whole life of regret for not giving you this and having your head pierced by an arrow? Kale locked his scabbard to his belt and used his now free hand to grab the item inside the box, an ornate silvery helmet with ornate dragon patterns, forming a T-visor on the front so he could see and breathe properly. It was a beautiful helmet with a dragon added to its crown. The sides had dragon wings patterns, and the remaining of the helmet felt like small scales once he ran his thumb over it. Neltharion, on the other hand, saw some men staring at his brothers, woman, and felt angry. With a loud earth-shaking roar, he stared at them, green smoke coming out of his snout and small flames coming out from between his teeth as he opened his massive jaw, making everyone gulp and instantly back away. What a good dragon, Kale thought as he smirked, staring at his men, then at Valyria. I understand, my wife. He added the final words with a teasing tone and hugged her tightly, gently whispering in her ears, I will punish you for that behavior when we get back. You have no idea how fucked you are. Valyria's legs trembled, but she endured. Once they parted from their hug, Kale climbed Neltharion's saddle while equipping his helmet. Until I am back, Skagos is yours, my queen, he said out loud, staring at his sister, earning him a grin and a nod in response. Let's go then. After Valyria backed away, Neltharion flapped his massive wings and took to the skies at absurd speed, leaving the camp behind in seconds, turning the landscape into a blur and moving full speed towards the southeast. Once everything was settled, Commander Aron took a step forward. I will be under your direct command, my lady, he said while dropping to one knee, and everyone else followed suit. Good, she nodded. Now escort me to my husband's tent. I will be living there. Your will shall be done. My lady, he bowed his head and led her back to the camp. As they were walking inside, a bunch of slaves kept staring at Valyria's figure. She was alluring, beautiful and exotic, especially with those thin clothes. One brute of a man shouted from the distance, Hey lass, come ov dash. He was instantly interrupted by a pillar of fire that was instantly ignited below his feet. For the next several seconds, only cries of pain could be heard alongside the horrible smell of burning flesh. She snorted in disgust. Fucking savages. She then turned towards Aron, who was sweat-dropping from what he just watched. Not even his lord had killed a man personally yet, at least not in the presence of any of the soldiers, otherwise he would have known by now. Who was that vermin? She asked with narrowed eyes. He was the son of the last Lord Magnar of King's House, my lady. He gulped. No one important then. Chapter 27. Through Glass Eyes. I was listening to this one HOTD soundtrack on a loop while writing this, and I would totally recommend, although not needed, House of the Dragon OST, The Great Council. It has been rough for the past several moons for Valyria. In the beginning, it was fine. Sleeping with the obsidian candle nearby would always allow her and Kale to communicate through distance, and even if they couldn't communicate for some reason, she could still see him going about his daily schedule. It felt like she was exploring the world every time she fell asleep. The beauty of the River Roine, which shone like sapphire under the moonlight, as the red dragon flew past the velvet hills northeast of Pintos. The weird, almost out of place, forest of Qohor. The vastness of the grasslands that expanded beyond what the eyes could see and seemingly stretched to the ends of the world. It felt like watching someone exploring the unknown from above firsthand, and even with all of her years riding Vanerin, she never felt as free as she felt while watching Kale grinning as the sun marked his face, flying through the world as if he owned it. She watched Kale while he was camping, hunting, reading his books, and even painting several canvases as the days went by. During the days, she was preoccupied with the management of Skagos, or how Kale had named it, Valinor, the new kingdom under the regal lion twin-headed dragon banner. And what a beautiful banner it was, a silvery white dragon with 2 heads and red eyes, spitting crimson flame on a black field. The dragon represents their bloodline and power. The 2 heads represent both of them as the last regal lions. The crimson fire represents their magic, and the black field represents what would be left behind of those who try to defy them. Nothing but ash and emptiness. After subduing the Skagosi, it was ridiculously simple to take over the island and start the operations. First, The task was to create a road to the mountain chain that Kale had spoken of. And so, they did, and though it took a couple of moons, it was done. Not only was the dragon road crafted perfectly, but Vaila also used dragonfire to blow a hole in the mountain chain, creating their very own bloody gate, surrounded by a snowy wasteland and mountains so steep that they would be impossible to climb. The Valyrian slaves were still not sent here, they would be sent last, and according to her husband, they would be freed. An absurd thought according to her. Vaila tried to dissuade Kale of that idea, but he was surprisingly firm. She even remembered his words. "It's cheaper to keep free men than slaves," he said back then. She couldn't understand. Slaves were just that, slaves? How could they be more expensive than free men? Kale didn't go into details. The only thing he said was a single word, capitalism, while grinning. What in the seven hells is that? She didn't know, but she trusted him regardless. It was when the second phase of their plan came to be that things started getting scary for Vaila. At this point, her goal was to take advantage of the natives and children of the forest to discover all the passageways that lead to the heart of the island. They needed to know all of the possible ins and outs. No sneak attacks would be tolerated in the future. The Skagosi were proud, but after a few moons of going hungry and being overworked, they bent easily. Under the promises of freedom, they sang like birds and explained every entrance and exit that they knew of. They were under the impression that those areas would only be guarded, so they didn't see any problem in sharing the information. Poor fools. Once all of the information was extracted, the Skagosi that gave the information were slain, and all the tunnels but a select few remained intact. 3 to be precise, 1 north, 1 west, and 1 east. South had the Dragon Gate. No need for tunnels there. It was during the third moon that Vaila started to fear her visions through the glass candle. The sight of the Bone Mountains was as awe-inspiring as it was dreadful, the largest mountain chain in the known world, so massive in size and scale that it made the capital of Valyria and its 14 flames look like a tiny speck on the map. She saw how it took almost a fortnight for Kale to cross that mountain by dragon flight, and while it was in no way so huge that it would demand that amount of time, Kale decided to use the massive pillars of stone to train Neltharion. Vaila watched for days as Kale made Neltharion hit the massive stone pillars that looked like huge fingers that stretched all the way towards the skies, with nothing but his tail. For days she heard Neltharion crying in agony and pain, trying and hitting the pillars again and again. Even dragon scales weren't tough enough to endure such treatment. But surprisingly, after 10 days, Neltharion didn't cry anymore, and each swing of his tail would crush the pillars. She quickly understood her brother-husband's goal. He wanted to create another form of combat for his dragon. It was known that when 2 dragon riders clashed in the skies, it would always be a massacre. Even survivors had to retire their dragons due to them losing a wing or a leg. Unless the size or number difference was so massive that it would guarantee a complete domination, Dragonlords fighting each other would always end up with a Pyrrhic victory at best. Dragons always left themselves open when striking one another after all. At this point, she was actually interested in the sights of the Golden Empire. She wondered if her brother would stop by. Sadly, he didn't. In fact, Kale made sure to avoid ET like it was a plague, even flying all the way north, through the plains of the Jogos Nigh, only turning south after reaching Ngai, flying above the Bleeding Sea. It was from this point on that things changed. The moment she saw them, the 5 monstrosities built south of the Bleeding Sea, blocking the path of the nomad people from the gray waste from going west, that the glass candle visions started to blur. The 5 forts, the biggest and oldest buildings in the known world. The black fused stone that resembled Valyria, yet different. Less decorated but twice as imposing, more durable and everlasting. Even Neltharion started to falter mid-flight when they reached that point, seemingly afraid of moving south towards the mountains of the Morn and the dreadful Shadowlands. There was something wrong with that place. Even Valyrian magic couldn't withstand it. She saw Kale persevere with his dragon. His once carefree grin and relaxed attitude turned into a grim, focused, and scared one. From that point on, she couldn't watch her husband as before. Every night she tried, only to have nightmares that she would forget the moment she woke up the next day. The only remnants being her accelerated heart and her body covered in cold sweat. For the next moons, her task as the Queen of Valinor continued. She did all she could, from solving pesky issues between their men to planning the deployment of their troops and resources. During her sleep, only flashes could be seen, scenes disconnected from one another that brought her great fear. She shouldn't have allowed Kale to venture to that godforsaken place. Flashes of a dragon landing in an empty, blighted wasteland. Flashes of Kale walking alone towards the darkness. Flashes of a black river with a fluorescent green hue that extended through the horizon. Flashes of a city, abandoned yet somewhat alive. The biggest city she had ever seen, bigger than Valyria by a long shot. For moons her dreams were plagued by the flashes of the Shadowlands and whatever darkness lies in that place. She couldn't see Kale's face anymore, only watch him from his back. She saw him falter, him losing strength as if he was losing hope. She watched as he kept reading tomes in an underground library, with candles so dim that he could barely see 5 feet beyond his reach. But it was when the 10th moon arrived that she fell in true despair. She saw him entering a temple in the middle of nowhere. How did he get there? She did not know. She could barely keep up with the flashes at this point. She saw a black statue of a massive toad, oozing green fluids from its mouth and a huge pillar of white, shining like starlight within the darkness. Finally, she saw a huge circular gate with a red glow that came from behind it, giving it an image similar to that of a solar eclipse, yet it didn't feel mystical or mysterious. It felt wrong. Once the gate slid to the side, her vision was covered by a crimson glow that prevented her from peeking anymore, and it was at that moment that her glass candle cracked. Jumping out of bed, covered in cold sweat, Valyria grabbed her armor and sword, taking a bit too long to properly equip them due to her shaky hands. "Arin!" Valyria shouted with a panicked voice, only for the man in question to rush inside her room with a sword in his hand and a grim look on his face, looking everywhere for a possible enemy. "Your Grace?" He replied a bit worried once he saw her state. "From now on you take care of this place. I shall fly to the Shadowlands," she said with a shaky but determined tone, sheathing her sword in her scabbard. Putting away his sword, Arin went on one knee while lowering his head. "I am sorry, Your Grace, but the king said that we shouldn't let you fly east." Her eyes narrowed. "I am going, and if you are going to try to stop me, you better be ready to fight my dragon." "Your Grace." Arin panicked. Kale's orders were strict after all. "You can't stop me. I am not asking for your permission. I am informing you. I shall leave right away," she said as she walked past him going downstairs from her small castle. Following her from behind, through the halls of King's House, Arin was trying his best to calm her down. "Your Grace, please understand. The king gave us strict orders to not let you go there. Kale might be the king here, but I am no peasant that can be ordered around and locked when convenient. I am a dragon," she said as calmly as she could while opening the main gate out of the castle. Before Arin could say another word, a loud roar echoed through the skies. Valyria knew that this wasn't Vainarin's roar. She could recognize her own dragon flawlessly after all. Looking up, she saw a bronze-colored dragon, not too big but not too small either, a perfect mixture between strength and speed, circling King's House Castle before landing outside the gate. "Vishna," she mumbled while increasing her speed, walking outside. Once outside, she saw a large man climbing down from the dragon's saddle. He had shoulder-length black hair with white here and there, and yellow, almost golden, eyes. "Valinor," she said while jogging towards him. "Lady Valyria," he said with a grin, but then suddenly remembered, "Or should I call you Your Grace now?" She chuckled before replying, "Yes. I believe you should." She looked around and saw all the Regalion's bannermen kneeling towards their monarch. Taking the hint, Valinor suddenly went on one knee and bowed his head. "The king sent me one final message a few days ago, and demanded that I come here to prevent you from leaving, Your Grace." Valyria's eyes narrowed. She gulped hard as her hand trembled while holding her sheathed sword. "How? When?" "He sent a message through the glass candle at the Regalion Tower on the Freehold, telling me to come here and prevent you from leaving. He informed me that he would have to destroy his own glass candle, but he knew that you would panic when he did and demanded that I moved here." Valinor answered with his head low. At this moment, Arin saw the perfect chance and introduced himself into their conversation. "With all due respect, Your Grace, Lord Valinor, I think it's better for us to talk about such matters inside," he said as he looked around towards the others kneeling in the snow. Finally noticing the environment, Valyria nodded and turned to Valinor. "Walk with us inside. Tell me everything." "As you wish, Your Grace," said Valinor as he stood up.
Thanks for watching. You can find the next videos in the playlist linked in the info card, directly on my channel, or right here on the screen. And as always, if you have any feedback, feel free to share it in the comments too.